era of football. Est video is purement para intratnamiento y no infringe derechos de autor. Los derechos de la novela y la imagen son del autor original, no reclama más propiedad. No te gusta esperar y quieres escuchar este fanfic completo ahora? Suscríbete a nuestro Patreon, donde encontrarás los mejores fanfics. Chapter 901. Fate. Did you guess that I would do this? When the final whistle sounded, Lucian closed his eyes for a moment, then found Zheng Qi and asked. Of course, in that situation, you only have this one choice. Zheng Qi nodded. And did you make preparations in advance? Lucian continued to ask. Of course not. How can I prepare for such a situation? I just want that moment to come a little slower. Zheng Qi shook his head. How could I know that Feng Tu was in danger at the time? Coincidence? Lucian said to himself, and then shook his head. No, it's not a coincidence. You have been observing and looking for such an opportunity. If the opportunity appears in front of you, you will definitely be able to seize it. Zheng Qi laughed. Yes, although the opportunity may not appear, we need to be prepared at any time. Look at it this way, my loss is not unfair. Lucian sighed. After passing our level, it seems that nothing in the country can stop you, but in the World Cup, be careful. Zheng Qi nodded. I know what you mean, we will pay attention, but our composition is actually relatively simple. That's right. Lucian nodded. So sometimes I envy you a little. No need to envy, see you next year. Zheng Qi laughed. Lucian smiled bitterly and turned to leave. But when he left, he frowned. For some reason, he suddenly felt that Zheng Qi's voice seemed a little bit wrong compared to usual. However, he couldn't think of anything wrong. He and Zheng Qi had been familiar with each other for a while, but they hadn't seen each other for a while, so Zheng Qi's voice had changed a little, and he soon noticed it. But Zheng Qi's teammates, under such circumstances, could hardly detect anything. They just rushed over, and then started a crazy celebration with Zheng Qi. This year's China Cup Championship belongs to Fifan, to Zheng Qi, and to everyone in Fifan. This is Fifan's second China Cup Championship. In theory, they don't need to be so ecstatic, but in connection with the situation this season, this China Cup Championship is indeed worth celebrating wildly. This is Fifan's third championship this season. Now they are 2 championships away from the unprecedented 5-time champion. If they don't celebrate now, when will they celebrate? But Fifan's players didn't celebrate for too long. The last round of the game will be in 3 days, and they haven't reached the final breathing time yet. Their opponent in the last round is Yushan. Yushan is now 3 points ahead of the relegation zone and has basically escaped the danger of relegation. However, at this time, any team will fight with Fifan. Fifan has fought 2 games in a row and now has to fight the 3rd game. No matter how strong a team is, it is impossible to score goals and win continuously when it is in poor condition. Even if it faces a weak team, it is unlikely that a strong team will achieve good enough results in the game, because the performance in the game requires everyone to be in a good mental state. So on the court, they just echoed and celebrated with the stands for more than 10 minutes, and then returned to the locker room. Next, they have to rest well and use a better state to welcome the last round of the game. Although after winning the final of the China Cup, the opponents in the lead will basically not cause him more trouble, but after all, the last victory still depends on them. Boss, you're awesome. You can achieve such a result alone against Lucian and Xing. After returning to the locker room, Liga Rui began to praise Zheng Qi's performance crazily. I didn't expect that either. Zheng Qi laughed. But at the time, it's time to work hard, isn't it? It will be very tiring. Su Jing said with some worry. After all, such an operation may not feel anything at the time. After all, when the mind is highly concentrated and tense, people can't feel tired, but once they relax, they will feel extremely tired. It's okay, not very tired. Zheng Qi patted his chest and said. Meng Fan looked at Zheng Qi and felt a little strange. In the past year, Zheng Qi has not been in a coma. Could it be that his chronic illness has been cured by itself? It is not impossible. After all, the time when he got sick was his growth period. Now that he is over 20 years old, the growth period is over. Some congenital problems will naturally get better, which is not a rare thing. At least Meng Fan knows that he has been taking care of Zheng Qi. He knows clearly whether Zheng Qi has a sudden coma. Since last year, the frequency of Zheng Qi's coma has been decreasing. This looks like a gradual self-healing. I hope it is really completely cured. Meng Fan thought with some relief. Having spent so many years with Zheng Qi, he certainly hopes to see Zheng Qi's health getting better and better. Otherwise, as the person who takes care of Zheng Qi, he will feel that he is not qualified enough. Zheng Qi quickly waved his arms. Okay, everyone, take a good rest, start training tomorrow, and win Yushen in 3 days, win the league championship, and then we will have a good rest. The extraordinary players laughed one after another. Yes, there is only one domestic game left this season, and the World Cup game will be in half a month, which is enough for them to have a good rest. As for the game in the World Cup, they will prepare seriously at the time, that's it. Now they can put all their energy and attention on the last game. After the disbandment, the extraordinary players did start to relax. There is another game in 3 days, of course, they can't completely relax themselves, but tonight, it is a good choice to relax their minds. Do you want to go out for a walk and change your mind? Su Jing said to Zheng Qi. Okay, let's go to the mall downstairs. The largest mall in G City is at the foot of our club. I haven't been there much. Zheng Qi laughed. With the current equality outside, shopping has long been extinct. However, shopping in large shopping malls is something that everyone is willing to do. The area of today's large shopping malls is no smaller than that of a small town in the past, and people will not feel bored when shopping. In order to make people feel more active in the outside world, the top of each floor of the shopping mall will simulate scenes such as the sky and clouds, making you feel like you are outdoors. Of course, fake is fake after all, and more people are more accustomed to enjoying the outside world in the football era, but there is still a big difference between being in a mall and in a game. Just walking around in the mall, chatting casually, and not caring about anything else, strolling around, looking around, it is indeed a good way to relieve stress. So and Su Jing said it, Zheng Qi agreed. Today's game was indeed overdrawn a lot, and it was right to relax at this time. After dinner, the two of them started to wander around the mall. Zheng Qi was not very interested in shopping. Although he was a very particular person in life, whether it was clothes or food, he was very particular. However, there were differences between men and women. No matter how particular a man was, he would just buy something when he saw it, while women enjoyed the shopping process more. Su Jing was no exception. She wandered around and looked around. Zheng Qi had no problem with this. When Su Jing was chatting with people, he would look around or think about some problems by himself. They had been wandering around for nearly an hour. Just when Su Jing was about to walk out of a shop, she was pulled by Zheng Qi. Although she didn't know what happened, Su Jing's trust in Zheng Qi made her hide in the shop with Zheng Qi. "Shh, watch carefully," Zheng Qi said to Su Jing mysteriously. The next moment, Su Jing saw Niaoliwa and Zheng Qi walking out of the shop, talking and laughing. The most important thing is that Niaoliwa put her arm around Zheng Qi's neck, and it was very natural. She was a little taller than Zheng Qi, and there was no sense of incongruity in doing such a gesture. These two guys are very affectionate. Zheng Qi sighed. When did they get together? Judging from their appearance, it seems that they have already, Su Jing said with some surprise. They had some in their past. Didn't Niaoliwa say a long time ago that she had made an appointment with Zheng Qi? If Zheng Qi was not too young at the time and couldn't go out, they might have been together a long time ago. Zheng Qi chuckled. When they were in the ZY team, they were the ones who talked the most, especially Niaoliwa, who always pestered Zheng Qi to talk. Zheng Qi, on the other hand, talked very little and liked to act cool. Maybe it was because of curiosity that you got together with Zheng Qi. Su Jing smiled. Well, thinking about it this way, I did a good thing by setting up this club. Otherwise, after the ZY team disbanded, the two of them would have gone their separate ways. How could they have created such a touching story? Zheng Qi touched his chin and said after thinking carefully. This can also be considered fate. Su Jing smiled. Yes, it's fate. Zheng Qi nodded repeatedly. In the final analysis, we are still together. It is indeed fate. If you really want to talk about fate, I didn't know you before, but because of an accident, I met you, and we became partners and teammates. Is this our fate? Su Jing suddenly turned around and asked Zheng Qi. It should be considered. Zheng Qi was stunned for a moment. After he finished speaking hesitantly, he actually didn't dare to look at Su Jing, but quickly changed the subject. Let's go, continue shopping. They left, we don't have to be afraid of anything. After saying this, Zheng Qi took the lead in walking out of the shop and walked towards the next shop. Su Jing followed him, but a happy smile began to appear on her face. Chapter 902. Supreme Glory. Of course, a night of relaxation won't do anything, but it's better than nothing. I don't know if those two guys stayed out all night. If it affects the training effect today, I will criticize them as the captain. After seeing Sujin, Zheng Qi immediately laughed and said something. Sujin glanced at him. Are you jealous of others? TSK, how could that be? Zheng Qi sneered. It's just that as a captain, I have to supervise them well under such circumstances. Sujin laughed and didn't answer. They were the first two to arrive, and soon, the others arrived one after another. It's not time for training yet, so it's normal for some people to come early and some to come late. Zheng Qi and Niuliwa came to the training room one after another. The others didn't mind. After all, everyone lived on this floor, and it was normal for anyone to come together. Only Zheng Qi and Sujin looked at each other. Zheng Qi had a weird smile on his face, and Sujin glared at Zheng Qi. Okay, let's start training now, focusing on recovery training. In 3 days, we have to be in the best condition to welcome this game. We are on the road in the last round, and we don't know what map the opponent will use, so we have to focus on ourselves. As long as we perform well enough, the opponent will not be able to stop us from moving forward. Zhu Shan used such words as opening remarks, but he would not prepared for the game map. It was the last round, and the opponent had basically successfully retained their position. In this case, they did have a lot of options, such as defending to get a point, because getting a point would definitely keep them in the league. In fact, even if they lost, they would not be relegated. They were 3 points ahead of the relegation zone, and they had a lot of goal difference. Such an advantage can be said to be very large. And they might also use a offensive to surprise for fun. In the final analysis, they have no desire now, just want to show off or show their face. With such a mentality, it seems normal for them to do anything. However, in terms of probability, it is still possible to calculate. This is not what Zhu Shan is good at. Guessing the opponent's psychology and characteristics, and then inferring the big strategy that the opponent may use, this is what Meng Fan is best at. So today was just a recovery training. Zhu Shan was waiting for the answer and result from Meng Fan. Meng Fan did not let him down. According to my analysis, Zhu Shan is most likely to use defensive tactics. Although they can also use offensive to deal with us, everyone knows that if they compete with us in offensive, even Chengqing will lose to us, let alone them. Only defense can prevent us from getting 3 points. Meng Fan said to Zhu Shan. In this case, what we have to do is actually very simple. The maps that are easy to defend are nothing more than Changping and Changbangpo. Changbangpo is blocked by a river and is suitable for defense and sneak attacks. Changping has a complex terrain and there are only a few roads that can be passed. It is suitable for continuous blocking and delaying the attack. The possibility of these two maps is the highest. If that's the case, then we will definitely win. Zhu Shan thought about it and said to Meng Fan. Meng Fan smiled and nodded. Of course, he understood what Zhu Shan meant. If it was Changping, then they would attack head-on. With Shinrao Fei's ability to attack head-on and Bin Xiaokai and Zheng Qi's ability to seize opportunities, this kind of defense without much technical content would easily be beaten to a pulp. If a map like Changbangpo was used, it would be more complicated, but with the help of the terrain, it would not be possible to have no flaws at all. Most of them would still be thinking of sneak attacks. As long as Fifan focused his attention and attacked and defended patiently, it would not be too difficult to win the game. The league championship is actually ours. After going through so many difficult situations, we will not make mistakes in this game. Zhu Shan said to Meng Fan confidently. Meng Fan nodded heavily. He also agreed with this point. In the league, Fifan had a great start. Of course, Chengqing and Tin's brave interception and blocking also made them encounter many difficulties, especially after the start of the second half of the season. There were several key nodes that made Fifan very dangerous. However, with the concerted efforts of Fifan, they overcame these dangers and the most devilish schedule. Now, after the baptism of continuous battles, they are definitely not something that Zhu Shan can stop. Although Zhu Shan is also a mid-level team, they are used to playing at their best in such a situation where they have nothing else to ask for, but this year they did not play well enough. They have been working hard for relegation for a long time in the league. Now they have just succeeded in relegation. In such a situation, they will certainly seem to be very relaxed, but they will not fight to the death like they did before to relegation. If you don't have enough strength, you have to rely on fighting spirit. But now it seems that how much fighting spirit Zhu Shan has is also unknown. In this case, if Zhu Shan still wants to successfully stop Fifan, either Fifan's state is so bad that it is completely useless, or their luck is so bad that every time the map changes, it is aimed at them. Otherwise, they can't even draw this game, let alone lose. As for this, Li Qing's is actually clear in his mind. In the league, he has been chasing Fifan for a long time. He knows clearly that Team He wants to win the league championship, which cannot be decided in the last round, but before that, the cup game has already determined such a result. The only possibility for Team He to win the league championship and Fifen to lose the league championship is that they lose to Zheng Qi in the cup game. Under such a huge blow and the shattering of that dream of 5 crowns, it is possible to be psychologically unbalanced, perform abnormally in the last round, and then be overtaken by Team He. Otherwise, there will be no other possibility. Of course, Zheng Qi did not put all his hopes on Zheng Qi. Before that, he had to catch up with Fifen and never fall behind. Fifen had to try his best in every game, and he could not appear in the final of the China Cup in the best condition. Under such circumstances, Zheng Qi would have a chance to win. However, to Zheng Qi's disappointment, Zheng Qi did not win. Fifen's performance was not only beyond his expectations, but also beyond Zheng Qi's expectations. They went through the most difficult situation at the most difficult time and won a victory that would be recorded in history. They are now the cup champions and have won 3 championships this season. Then the 4th championship will not be too far away from them. 2 days later, the last round of the game began to kick off. The last few rounds of the game were held at the same time, which was for the sake of fairness. Team He's opponent in this round was Zheng Qi, which was not easy to deal with. Their current ranking has risen to 5th. Although the score is far behind Team He, their strength is still very outstanding. Facing such an opponent, even Zheng Qi dared not ignore the opponent too much under such circumstances. He could only arrange this game well and treat it seriously. Zheng Qi certainly had no problem with his own control ability. His level has always been excellent. Under his command, although Zheng Qi did not want to lose casually in the last round, Team He still had the advantage in their home court. They entered the halftime break with a 1-goal lead in the first half. In the second half of the game, they performed even better. During the halftime break, they would not know the news of other teams. Team He was just thinking about not having any problems in the second half of the game and winning the game smoothly. Otherwise, if Fifen encountered a draw or lost, and they failed to win, wouldn't it be more embarrassing? In the second half, they quickly scored 2 goals in a row, temporarily surpassing Fifen in goal difference. If Fifen was a draw, then they would win the league championship this season. However, at this time, the stand suddenly calmed down. The players in the venue didn't know the situation of other games, but the fans knew it. They had been keeping enough enthusiasm before, because Fifen had not been leading, and Yu Shen's defensive tactics were still very effective. However, just now, Fifen's captain Zheng Qi scored perhaps the most important goal of the season. 1-0. Fifen took the lead away from home, and they only had less than 10 minutes left to win the league championship. Will they let such a victory slip away from their hands? Impossible. After Fifen took the lead, he was not conservative. They quickly launched an interception in the midfield. In addition to Liu Shibo and 3 teammates guarding the last line of defense, Zheng Qi, Shen Ruofei, and Bin Shikai, each with a teammate, were divided into 3 teams and began to frantically interfere with the opponent's large force. When Yu Shen rushed to the last line of defense, there were only a few seconds left in the game. Fifen's players raised their hands high, and the whole venue began to fall into an incomparable carnival. The 4th championship has arrived. Fifen is only 1 step away from the unprecedented 5-time champion. For this club, which has only been established for less than 4 years, the achievements they have made are undoubtedly full of supreme glory. Chapter 903. The Promising Extraordinary. When the match was over, Zheng Qi was filled with endless joy. This was the 4th championship of the season, and the 5-time champion had only 1 championship left. Most importantly, at this time, he could finally relax. After the start of this season, he had not really relaxed. At the beginning of the league, he had fewer burdens and tasks, but Fifen had such a high goal this year that he had to go all out in every game. After the first half of the game, others could have a good rest, and he went to play classical football again. In the domestic qualifiers and the World Cup, he basically had no rest in 2 months. The second half of the game was about to begin. The crazy pursuit and blocking of Zheng Qi and Team He made Fifen unable to relax for a moment, and Zheng Qi could not rest well. Now, he can finally relax. The World Cup will start in 20 days, and he can at least rest comfortably for a week. Thinking of this, Zheng Qi finally relaxed himself completely. Even on holidays before, he would not really relax. Whether it was his nerves or his body, he was always tense. How could he really relax if he had worries in his heart? But now, he could finally really relax. The infinite joy and real relaxation made Zheng Qi suddenly feel a little weak in his body, but in the game, this feeling was only a moment. Then, he began to hug his teammates crazily and celebrate crazily. At this moment, they deserved such a crazy celebration. Just based on their achievements at this moment, they can already be compared with the greatest teams in the history of professional games, because in the past nearly 100 years, so many great teams in the world have achieved the highest achievement, just like them at this moment, 4 championships. The extraordinary players celebrated crazily, hugging one by one, and the extraordinary fans in the stands were also celebrating crazily. Most of them have only been extraordinary fans for 1 or 2 years, but these 1 or 2 years are undoubtedly like a dream. The few who had been FIFA fans from the beginning were so excited that their eyes filled with tears. Most of them had just started playing football era in Zone 108, and then joined FIFA's guild, and thus became FIFA fans. Following FIFA, they had gone all the way from the amateur league to the top league, and now, they saw FIFA about to reach the pinnacle. It's so great to be a FIFA fan. At this moment, such a thought flashed through the minds of countless FIFA fans. The honor belongs to FIFA. They only have one last honor left to conquer. Last year, Zheng Qi also had such an opportunity, but they lost the game in the World Cup. I believe that FIFA will not make such a mistake again this year. Compared with Zheng Qi last year, their overall performance may be worse, but they are better in the number and performance of top players. In a cup competition, which is more accidental, FIFA's characteristics can make them perform better in the cup competition. Just look at their performance in the cup competition in recent years. They have participated in 3 China Cup competitions in total, and entered the final 3 times, won 2 championships and 1 runner-up. In the cup competition, their characteristics can be better played. Yuan Fei was still explaining his judgment, but at this time most people didn't want to listen to his analysis. Zheng Qi, who was far away in City B, nodded slightly. Grandpa Yuan Fei's analysis is very reliable. FIFA's current composition may still have some problems in the league, but in the cup competition, as long as they focus, there will be no big problems. Zheng Qi said. Why do I feel like they are more stable in the league this year? They got so many points. Qing said to her husband. FIFA to perform very well in the league this year. They scored over 100 points in the league, which has set a new record. Don't forget that even so, Qinhe is only 1 point behind them. If FIFA hadn't been working so hard, they might have collapsed in the chase of Qinhe. This year's league is not so easy to play, and it will be affected by many factors. Zheng Qi replied. Anyway, our son is still very good. And I heard from Wang Fan that he has been in a lot better condition in the past 2 years. He hasn't fainted once. It seems that his treatment is very effective. Qing said happily. Zheng Qi nodded. Yes, I hope it can be eradicated. Our family has suffered too much from this disease. Otherwise, I can become a top professional god instead of a club owner. TSK, are you good at operation? You can't even beat me in the game. Qing expressed disdain. I don't know why I fell in love with you back then. Zheng Qi's face blushed. It's because I haven't played for a long time. I was qualified to be a professional player back then. Just keep bragging. While the couple was flirting, the celebration of the extraordinary players had basically ended. Anyway, in the game, the next turn belonged to the extraordinary fans to celebrate, and they could start their celebration anytime and anywhere. Everyone's performance is excellent. Next we had 20 days of rest time, rest for a week, and then concentrate, and make an impact on the World Cup and our 5-time champion. After returning to the locker room, Zhu Shan excitedly said to all the players. As the head coach, Zhu Shan was also extremely excited at this time. Last year, his team's performance was enough to make him a top coach, although many people still think that he was mainly successful because he met a good team. This year's performance will make his fame and status rise again. Some people may still think that with FIFA's current overall strength, even if he has a dog tied to his coaching seat, he can still win many championships. But in fact, even if the team he leads is outstanding, it is not easy to achieve results. As a grassroots head coach, Zhu Shan also made a name for himself in the coaching position of FIFA. This made Zhu Shan equally excited and happy. After hearing Zhu Shan's words, FIFA's players cheered again. No one would be unhappy to get such an honor, and they also knew that the next World Cup would allow them to gain a more glorious status. This is a very remarkable thing. The media has discussed FIFA's achievements many times. Perhaps FIFA's fans are still cautiously avoiding talking about the 5-time champion as if it were taboo, and accumulating good character for FIFA's achievements, but the media will not care about this. After discussing scores, achievements, owners, legends, etc., Enough. Some media began to discuss from an economic perspective what would happen if FIFA won the 5 championships. When FIFA was first established, although they had a very good start, they were actually no different from many amateur teams. The only difference was that their players were better. At the same time, because of their outstanding performance in the new district, they had enough fans from the beginning, making them stand out in the amateur league and be comparable to many teams that have existed for a long time. However, if they were placed in the level league, their background would not be a big deal. Even compared with the then Canton, they were still far behind. The integration with Canton was the first step in their eyes. After that, they also had a lot of popularity in the A-level league. Combined with their overall strength, they completed a triple jump in 2 years and became part of a super team. Of course, even at the time, the overall value of FIFA club was still not very high. There were many outstanding players in their team with high personal value, but as far as the club itself was concerned, it would not have much wealth. That is, the billions of dollars invested by Zheng Qi and Jing were really nothing for a super club. You should know that the value of a club is actually reflected in 2 aspects. First, the owners it has won in history, and second, the number of fans supporting the club. In fact, these 2 can also be combined into one. Clubs with more owners often have more loyal fans, and the huge popularity brought by these fans can become a continuous source of wealth for the club. The 2 have always been complementary. The better the results, the more fans, the greater the fame, and the higher the income. FIFA was of course the bottom one when entering the Super League. Although they had tens of millions of fans at the time, the teams that could gain a foothold in the Super League all had millions of fans. Even the most popular teams like Zheng Qi had tens or even hundreds of millions of fans, which was not a rare thing. But what about now? FIFA's performance last year has already made them quite popular. At the time, they were no worse than many traditional strong teams. However, their fans' loyalty is still not fixed. If the performance declines in the future, many fans will also disperse and no longer be their fans. In fact, many clubs' Iron fans have such loyal fans after being washed one by one. The same is true for fans. Now, FIFA has achieved good enough results. If they can become the unprecedented 5-time champion, such results alone will be enough to make most of the fans who support them at the moment become their die-hard fans. This will be the biggest gain for FIFA. FIFA Club has a bright future, and all the players in the team also have a bright future. Chapter 904. Outbreak. If the club is good, the players will be good, and if the players are good, the club will be better. This has always been a complementary thing. According to many people's estimates, if FIFA can win the 5 championships, then the value of the entire club will immediately be able to rank among the top levels, or even higher. After all, the achievement of the 5 championships is something that no club has ever achieved before. The club, which has only been established for 4 years, has won an honor that no one has been able to win in hundreds of years of history. This is already something that is exciting enough for everyone. Being able to achieve such a great achievement is worthy of any reward. If the club is good, the players' value will naturally rise. With FIFA's current fame, the commercial contracts obtained by each of their players will definitely have a high increase, even the substitutes. So everyone is in a good mood. In the next week, they plan to have a good rest and then prepare for the final championship. After going offline, FIFA's players came out of the game cabin one after another, discussing with each other, and preparing to do what they want to do. Zheng Qi also came out of the game cabin. Of course, the extraordinary players entered the game cabin together. After all, as professional players, their game cabins are different from those of ordinary players, and they are superior in performance. The production of game cabins is originally one of the most important links in the modern industrial system. Su Jing's family's company produces this. Through many orders, it has gradually become a top company. Now among the top 500 companies in the world, at least half are game cabin production companies. This is already the most consumed product in the world. Since almost everyone has one, there is naturally a difference in performance. It is not that high-performance ones will definitely sell the best. Many average performance ones are also very popular because they are cheap. For ordinary players, many people only need a game cabin and do not need other experiences. However, the game cabins of professional players must be the latest models. The renewal of game cabins alone can also allow professional clubs to gain some advantages in the competition. At the same time, the game cabin manufacturers behind each club can also make their newly produced game cabins sell better through the performance of the clubs they support. At the same time, the professional players' experience and feelings about the new game cabin can also enable manufacturers to improve the game cabin better, which is also a complementary thing. Therefore, when each professional player enters the game cabin, he must enter with his teammates. Anyway, the game cabin does not need to be bound to any account. One person has one account. As long as the person is there, he can log into any game cabin. After everyone came out of the game cabin, Zheng Qi also turned out of the game cabin. The moment his feet touched the ground, he suddenly felt that his feet were a little weak. He couldn't help but shook his head and smiled bitterly as his body became so weak. But it's no wonder. In the past few months, I have been soaking in the game almost day and night, and rarely go out for a run. It seems that I have to recover from exercising. Just when Zheng Qi was thinking about this, he suddenly lost consciousness. The last thing Zheng Qi heard was Su Jing's exclamation. For other extraordinary players, what they can see is also the moment when Zheng Qi fell down. The person closest to Zheng Qi was Su Jing. She was the first to notice that something was wrong with Zheng Qi. She saw Zheng Qi flip out of the game cabin, stand on the ground, then sway a few times and fall down. Su Jing wanted to hold Zheng Qi, but failed. Fortunately, Shinrano Fei on the other side of Zheng Qi reacted quickly and held Zheng Qi. Su Jing followed up and held Zheng Qi so that he would not fall on the game cabin and get a bloody head. Just when Su Jing held Zheng Qi and Shinrano Fei held Zheng Qi, both at a loss, a figure rushed over at the fastest speed. "Come, leave it to me." Meng Fan, who also came out of the game cabin, climbed over 4 or 5 game cabins in the first place, and quickly came to Zheng Qi's side with a speed and reaction that made these otakus who played games unbelievable. The next moment, he took Zheng Qi from Su Jing and Shinrano Fei, put Zheng Qi on his back with a little force, and then dragged him out of the game cabin, found a flat ground, and put Zheng Qi down. At this time, Meng Fan still behaved very calmly. After laying Zheng Qi flat, Meng Fan asked others not to gather around and keep the air flowing, and then ran out of the competition room like a gust of wind. Less than half a minute later, Meng Fan ran back like the wind, holding a medium-sized box in his hand. Until this time, Meng Fan opened the box and took a deep breath to calm himself down. Then, he took out one needle after another from the box and pierced Zheng Qi's face and chest one by one. "Wow, is this acupuncture? I've heard of it but never seen it." Li Rui couldn't help but mutter in his heart. The other extraordinary players were actually shocked at this moment. Zheng Qi fell inexplicably, and Meng Fan turned into a mysterious doctor, which made their imaginations fly. Meng Fan's movements were very fast. 18 fine needles were quickly inserted into Zheng Qi's face and chest. Until the last needle was inserted, Zheng Qi, who seemed stiff all over, relaxed at this moment. Seeing this scene, Meng Fan breathed a sigh of relief. Meng Fan knew Zheng Qi's chronic illness very well. He knew that he had no other problems. It was just that after being overworked, he would easily fall into such a state of suspended animation. There was no other way to cure it. He could only wait for him to recover slowly. In this process, his acupuncture could relax his whole body and make it easier for him to return to a normal state. Although this was only a temporary solution, for Meng Fan, this was the most effective way to relieve Zheng Qi's illness after many attempts. At least it was very effective before. However, Meng Fan also knew that what was able to relieve it well before might not be the case now. Zheng Qi had not had an attack for such a long time. This time, his attack must be very different from the past. So after seeing that Zheng Qi's symptoms had stabilized somewhat, Meng Fan first called on others to help Zheng Qi to his bed, and then made a phone call. "Boss, something went wrong." Zheng Qi was in a coma again, and this time it was still in broad daylight, not at night. When Zheng Thongli received Meng Fan's call, he almost threw the visual system in front of him away. "What's going on? Didn't you say that he hadn't had an attack for a long time?" Zheng Thongli asked in surprise. Although he didn't have a very good relationship with his son, he was still his son, and the two of them had some minor misunderstandings. After listening to Meng Fan's detailed explanation, Zheng Thongli realized that this time the problem might be very big. He hadn't had any attacks for almost a year. If he didn't have any attacks in the future, it would be a good thing, but if he suddenly had an attack at this time, you can tell with your brain that it would probably be more serious than before. After hanging up the phone, Zheng Thongli thought about it and notified his wife. Then the couple immediately chose the fastest way to rush from City B to City G. The fastest way, of course, is the latest high-speed rail. From buying tickets to getting on the train to leaving the station, it only takes 2 hours in total. Although their private plane can arrive faster, it takes a lot of time just to apply for the route. In this era when many people own private planes, routes have become the most in-demand thing. Normally, with the fame and status of Zheng Qi and his wife, they would of course choose to travel by private plane, but in this kind of sudden emergency, it is faster and more convenient to take the ordinary people's high-speed rail. However, considering the wealth of these two people, they naturally chose a more private box with only 2 seats. Zheng Qi didn't care, mainly because Yi Qingyu was too famous back then. Once she appeared in the public eye in a hurry, it would inevitably cause a lot of speculation. After entering the box, Yi Qingyu took off her sunglasses and hat. Before Zheng Qi could say anything, his wife grabbed his ears. Ouch, it hurts. With only the couple there, Zheng Qi certainly didn't care about face, and just shouted in a low voice. Although Zheng Qi was much lower than his wife in terms of martial arts, Yi Qingyu, although she was carefree, often gave her husband face. If Zheng Qi shouted like this, she would probably let go. But today was different. You know you are not in good health, so you can't become a professional player. Why are you trying to make your son a professional player? Now that he is ill, if something really happens to him, I will kill you first and then commit suicide. Yi Qingyu did not let go, but shouted in Zheng Qi's ear. Isn't this the result of our discussion? You can't blame me for this. I also want to get rid of this problem in our family directly, so as not to harm future generations. Zheng Qi said with a wry smile. Yi Qingyu pulled Zheng Qi's ear hard again, and then let go. It's already like this, wife, it's useless to beat me to death. I thought he had recovered from his illness before, but now it seems that it's because he attaches too much importance to the games this season, which makes him too tense. He was overdrawing his body when he was not ill, and now he relaxes and fatigue breaks out, and his body can't bear it. Zheng Qi sat down and sighed. This is not your family's problem, Yi Qingyu comforted Zheng Qi in return. If there is no other choice, I can only let him be like my father. Zheng Qi shook his head and said helplessly. Chapter 905 Don't die. For a pair of parents whose son is seriously ill, Zheng Qi and Yi Qingyu's performance is obviously a bit understated. However, for a pair of parents who have long known that their son has a hidden disease and have been worried in recent years, Zheng Qi and Yi Qingyu's performance can only be regarded as normal. They quickly rushed to the Fifan Club, and then, together with Meng Fan, sent Zheng Qi to the best hospital. This is what they had prepared long ago. Sorry, boss, I'm not prepared. Meng Fan said to Zheng Qi ashamedly. He felt that he did not take good care of Zheng Qi, and it was his responsibility. Zheng Qi patted Meng Fan on the shoulder and didn't say much. Of course, he would not blame Meng Fan. When Zheng Qi didn't have much illness in the past 1 or 2 years, even he was optimistic that Zheng Qi's illness had been cured, let alone Meng Fan. For this kind of family genetic disease, Zheng Qi's family has been looking for a treatment method since 100 years ago. Now they are using the last method on Zheng Qi. I have seen hope, but now I find that there is still no hope. Zheng Qi's mood at the moment is gloomy. Zheng Qi felt a little comforted after seeing Su Jing standing by Zheng Qi's bed. When Zheng Qi fell, Su Jing was the first person to hold him up. And now, Su Jing has been staying by Zheng Qi's side. With Su Jing's personality and Zheng Qi's immature personality, there are indeed some ties between the two of them. However, it is really unknown how long it will take and how many opportunities will be encountered to break through this layer of window paper. At this time, Su Jing's feelings for Zheng Qi have completely exploded. Uncle, what's going on? Why did he fall suddenly? Su Jing asked Zheng Qi with tears in her eyes. Zheng Qi sighed. Do you want to hear it? This is a very long story. Zheng Qi said. Su Jing wiped away her tears, then regained some calmness and nodded vigorously. I want to know. Su Jing replied. She really wanted to know. Although she was very familiar with Zheng Qi, there were still many mysteries about Zheng Qi that had not been solved. Zheng Qi knew everything about her, whether it was her background or her past experiences. She was a very simple person, and there were no secrets in this regard. Zheng Qi also looked very simple, but she was not familiar with Zheng Qi's past. It was only this year that she learned about the existence of Zheng Qi and Yi Qingyu, and knew that these two very famous people were Zheng Qi's parents, but she still didn't know anything else. So at this time, she was extremely eager to know Zheng Qi's past. Zheng Qi nodded, and at this time, Yi Qingyu also came over, held Su Jing's hand, and then patted the back of her hand. Next, Zheng Qi told a very old story. Zheng Qi's family is not a big family. When the climate changed 100 years ago, the Zheng family was just an ordinary middle-class family. Like many families, the Zheng family entered the football era after the climate change. Fortunately, the head of the Zheng family gradually became famous in the game because of his talent in operation after entering the football era. After the professional league of the football era began to be established, he also became the first generation of professional players. Although he did not get any decent owners, in the era of pioneering, being able to become a professional player undoubtedly allowed him to gain more than before. However, when he entered the football era, he was not young, and the initial professional league was established 5 years after the beginning of the football era. The relatively formal league had to wait until more than 10 years after the beginning of the football era to be established in various countries around the world. After all, there is a process of familiarity and habit for everything. At the beginning, everyone just regarded the football era as a space for activities. It was not until later that they found that such competition was a very meaningful thing, which gave birth to the professional league. Like any professional league, those who participated in it at the beginning could only get a little fame and income, and the Zheng family was no exception. However, after all, he gained some relatively high income and fame, which gave him more energy to train his children. So after several years, when his son grew up, it was natural for him to become a professional player. At the same time, because he had a father who was good at operation, his starting point was higher than before. At the time, although the professional league had been initially stabilized, the level of players was still uneven. Under such circumstances, the second generation of professional players of the Zheng family quickly became famous and earned a lot of money. However, bad luck soon began to befall this player. In the early days of the professional league, the impact of professional games in the football era on the human body was not well understood. At the time, a team often had only a dozen people, and it was common for top players to play all the games. When the professional league reached a certain year, many top players had serious problems due to overdrawing their energy. The more top players at the time, the more likely they were to have problems. Unfortunately, this player from the Zheng family had problems. Moreover, his problem was much more serious than others. Others recovered quickly after getting proper rest, but he never recovered. When the third generation of professional players of the Zheng family also had such a problem, the Zheng family began to realize the consequences. At the time, the Zheng family had enough wealth and connections, and began to use various means to find solutions and the root cause of the disease. The root cause was soon found. This is a genetic defect. When the energy is overdrawn too much, it is easy to cause irreversible damage. This defect may have been left over from ancient times, but in the past, when the Zheng family lived, their energy could not be overdrawn to that extent. It can even be said that humans cannot overdraw so much energy, so for many people, such a genetic defect is not a defect at all. However, at this time, it will become a huge impact. The Zheng family began to consider making up for this defect. However, although genetic technology has made great progress, it cannot repair such a small defect. What's more, the most correct attitude is that the defects made up by the human body's automatic evolution are the most perfect. The compensation of gene defects is not just plastering the wall. A small change is very likely to cause the breakage of other gene chains. Only when humans adapt to the changes of the times over a long period of time can they become more perfect. So the next generation of the Zheng family, Zheng Qi's grandfather Zheng Qi, began to receive treatment while fighting in the professional league. His level at the time was already very good, but compared with the top players of the same generation, Zheng Qi's performance seemed a little unstable and he missed many opportunities to win the championship. This is because he was more testing what kind of overdraft and what kind of treatment can make him not get sick in such a situation of energy consumption. Just like vaccination, using a relatively small disease to stimulate the body's own immunity, so as to obtain the effect of immunity, this is what Zheng Qi thought. However, the effect of doing so is not very good. After 10 years of hard work in the professional league, Zheng Qi still fell into an irreversible disease. In the end, he could only choose to enter the football era and live in the football era. In the outside world, his body is like a vegetative person, maintaining a basic state of survival. His own consciousness continues to live in the football era until his body decays. Because of such serious consequences, Zheng Qi chose not to be a professional player, which created his glory as a chairman in the South. But not participating in professional competitions has always been a regret for Zheng Qi. As a child of a talented family, it is a shame for Zheng Qi not to enter the professional league in order to save his life. So he placed his hopes on Zheng Qi. His father Zheng Qi tried countless treatments at the time, but none of them worked. The treatment method used by Zheng Qi was the last method Zheng Qi came up with. That is, when Zheng Qi began to consume professional games, Meng Fan was by his side, using his superb ancient medical acupuncture to quickly make up for his consumed energy. This is a way of constantly consuming and replenishing, so that Zheng Qi's energy becomes more vigorous. Just like the physical training in the past, constantly consuming physical energy and then replenishing it, so that the player's physical fitness can gradually become stronger. This training method should also be very effective in the training of energy. This is also that final and most effective method that Meng Fan and others came up with after discussing with the best medical experts. Since energy overdraft will lead to irreversible damage, if you keep testing the edge of overdraft and then quickly make up for it, can you make the energy tolerance continue to increase, so that the energy consumption will no longer cause damage? It is precisely because of this that Zheng Qi tried every means to let Zheng Qi enter the world of football era, even though his son seemed so rebellious and autonomous since he was a child. Now it seems that we have failed. Although his mental tolerance is much better than mine and our predecessors, there is still an upper limit. We failed, but next, we will still make more attempts. At this point, Zheng Qi sighed and said to Su Jing, "What should we do next? Will he die?" Su Jing asked with a pale face. "I don't know either. It depends on the results of the next examination. I hope he can hold on longer." Zheng Qi sighed, "But I hope my son won't die." Si este escuchando esta novela en un canal distinto al mundo fanfic novelas, significat lo descarga and y subir en sin esfuerzos invitamos cordialmente a visitar nuestro canal. Mundo fanfic novelas all encontrarás la versión original de esta historia y podrás explorar muchas otras novelas de diversos narradores. Te esperamos para sumergirte en un mundo de novelas increíbles. Chapter 906. The Choice of Young People. When Zheng Qi woke up, it was 2 days later. He had been in a coma for 2 days. These 2 days were actually rest. Meng Fan's acupuncture allowed him to recover his energy quickly, but he had overdrawn too much before, so it took him 2 full days to recover before he woke up. After waking up, Zheng Qi looked at the ceiling, then blinked his eyes, and thought seriously about what had happened before. When he moved, Su Jing, who was sleeping beside him, had already woken up. "Are you awake?" Su Jing's face showed uncontrollable ecstasy, and then naturally reached out and touched Zheng Qi's face, as if she couldn't believe it was true. Zheng Qi was stunned for a moment, a little embarrassed, but he soon laughed. "What's wrong with me today? Did I faint?" "It's so embarrassing," Zheng Qi said. "You've been fainted for 2 days," Su Jing said. "Damn, no way." Zheng Qi was stunned. "Wait a minute, I'll call your parents over and let them explain it to you," Su Jing hurriedly said to Zheng Qi. She felt that it would be more appropriate for Zheng Qi's parents to explain these things to him. Zheng Qi was stunned for a moment, then nodded. He really didn't know what happened. But soon, he understood. After Zheng Qi told him everything in detail, Zheng Qi understood a lot of things. It wasn't that he had concealed a lot of things from Su Jing before, but because he himself didn't know. Now, all the truth appeared in front of him. What is my current situation? Will I die? Zheng Qi thought about it and asked. Zheng Qi and Yi Qingyu looked at each other. Even at this time, they couldn't help but feel like laughing. Zheng Qi's question was exactly the same as Su Jing's. You won't die, but your current situation is not good. Zheng Qi shook his head and said to Zheng Qi. What is the situation? Zheng Qi asked depressedly. It's the same as your grandfather's situation at the time. It's irreversible. You will become weaker and weaker. If you stop playing now, you may be able to live normally for many years, but if you insist on playing and overdraw your energy, it may not be long before you will be like your grandfather at the time. Zheng Qi said after a moment of silence. The body is soaked in the game cabin, and the consciousness is in the game. Zheng Qi said thoughtfully. Zheng Qi nodded. Zheng Qi remembered the grandfather he saw when he was a child. At the time, Zheng Qi's condition was already very bad. He was almost not awake every day, so Zheng Qi had never enjoyed the days of being cared for by his grandfather. Only his grandmother was by his side. Zheng Qi still remembers that even when his grandmother laughed with him, there was still sadness in her eyes. That kind of life would not be too easy. Zheng Qi sighed. Yes, but your grandfather was overdrawn more severely at the time. He fought in the professional league for more than 10 years. Even if we stopped immediately, he could not live longer. Zheng Qi sighed. Son, you are still young now. If you stop right away, then there will be no problem living normally for many years, but if you insist on playing games, we don't know how long you can last. Maybe you can finish this World Cup, but after that, your body will get worse faster. Yi Qingyu touched Zheng Qi's head and said softly. I know, Mom. Zheng Qi nodded. Your grandfather only lived to be 50 years old. He retired at the age of 30. After that, he spent more than half of his time in the game every day, and the time he could move in reality was no more than 10 hours. And the later he got, the more he needed to withdraw his consciousness from his body. In the last few years, he could only be awake for a few minutes every day. Zheng Qi looked at Zheng Qi. I hope you don't do that. That kind of life is too painful. I think I need to think about it. Zheng Qi thought about it, and then said to Zheng Qi, of course, you decide your own affairs. Zheng Qi nodded, then looked at Yi Qingyu. Yi Qingyu nodded knowingly, patted Zheng Qi's cheek, then stood up, and walked out of the ward with Zheng Qi. Only Zheng Qi and Su Jing were left in the ward. You should also take a rest, I will think about it myself. Zheng Qi said to Su Jing. No matter what choice you make, I will support you. Su Jing said softly to Zheng Qi. I know. Zheng Qi smiled and said to Su Jing. After gently patting Zheng Qi's hand, Su Jing also stood up and left the ward. After closing the door of the ward, Su Jing was shocked to find that Zheng Qi and Yi Qingyu were sitting on the bench in the corridor. Both of them looked painful and guilty. After seeing Su Jing come out, Yi Qingyu turned around and wiped her tears, then patted Zheng Qi. Why did you come out? We came out on purpose because we wanted you two to stay in there for a while. Yi Qingyu said to Su Jing with a forced smile. He wants to be alone for a while. Su Jing replied. I don't want him to continue playing. After all, even if his current situation is irreversible, he can at least live a normal life for many years. He is only in his early 20s. If he continues to play, he may not be able to live a normal life too early. He is still so young. Yi Qingyu's words were also choked with sobs. I think he may insist on finishing this season. Su Jing shook her head and said. Because he originally planned to play only this season. Zheng Qi looked at Su Jing and said. Su Jing nodded, then looked at Zheng Qi and Yi Qingyu, as if she wanted to say something, but didn't say it immediately. If you have anything to say, then say it. Yi Qingyu seemed to see something and said to Su Jing. I just think, when he makes a decision, no matter what it is, I hope he won't stop him. After thinking about it, Su Jing finally said it. Even if he insists on playing the game this season. Zheng Qi was stunned for a moment. But this is completely irresponsible for his future life. But at the time, you tried every means to let him play professional games, so at this time, at least, please respect his personal wishes. Su Jing said firmly. Although he is still young, many things are not well considered, but at least, let him decide what he wants to do. Looking at Su Jing's firm expression, Zheng Qi and Yi Qingyu seemed to be shocked. They looked at each other and didn't say much. Su Jing's current status is not low, but with her current status, compared with Zheng Qi and Yi Qingyu, it is indeed far behind. Zheng Qi is now one of the richest men in the country. He was the largest shareholder of Namgyeo. Even now, he still has a lot of shares in Namgyeo, but he does not participate in the operation and decision-making of Namgyeo. Yi Qingyu, known as the last star in China with countless fans, has faded out of the film industry for a long time, but her fame and wealth are not comparable to ordinary people. The key is that these two are not ordinary businessmen and movie stars. They have enough momentum. Ordinary people can't stand them at all. And they are Zheng Qi's parents. However, at this time, Su Jing did not waver in the face of them. Obviously, no matter what the identities of Zheng Qi and Yi Qingyu are, Su Jing does not want to waver in her own ideas at this moment. She will firmly defend Zheng Qi's own ideas. In fact, we think so too. Zheng Qi was silent for a while, then smiled bigly. Yes, we will bear any consequences together. Yi Qingyu held Zheng Qi's hand and said firmly. Su Jing breathed a sigh of relief. Although she was very determined, she knew at this moment that if a conflict really occurred between Zheng Qi and Yi Qingyu, she would not have much chance of winning. After all, the other party was Zheng Qi's parents, and now it seemed that Zheng Qi's parents were not what she imagined. It may have an impact on his future, but any decision should be made by him. I have already forced him once, and I don't want to force him a second time. Zheng Qi said with a wry smile. Yes, and you will definitely have health problems in the future, so there is no need to harm other girls. Even if there is no child, it doesn't matter. Yi Qingyu smiled bitterly and said, I don't want to have another one to continue the incense of your Zheng family. There is nothing to continue. Zheng Qi also shook his head. Anyway, my will has been made long ago. In the future, our property will belong to all mankind. It will be donated to the Genetic Society so that they have more funds to conduct research. Modern development is too fast, and the ancient way of human gene conversion can no longer keep up. Su Jing looked at Zheng Qi and Yi Qingyu, and at this moment, she felt great respect for these two people in her heart. Sure enough, just like the feeling when she'd first met, these two elders are very warm people. But what choice will Zheng Qi make at this time? Su Jing suddenly became curious at this time. You should go and rest first. You have been accompanying Zheng Qi for 2 days, and you were also overdrawn. Don't be too tired. Yi Qingyu said to Su Jing. Su Jing nodded. She was not a hypocritical person. She had been guarding for 2 days before, and had only taken a few naps beside the bed. She was indeed a little tired at this time. Just as she stood up, the door of the ward suddenly opened and Zheng Qi walked out. I've thought about it, Zheng Qi said. What, you thought about it so quickly? Don't you want to think about it for a while? Su Jing asked in surprise. Isn't it easy to figure it out? Zheng Qi waved his hand. No matter what, I have to play the remaining games of this season. There are only 5 games. If I don't win this 5-time championship, I won't be happy even if I live to be 100 years old. Su Jing looked at Zheng Qi and finally laughed. What are you laughing at, really? Let's go back to the club, Zheng Qi asked. No problem. Su Jing laughed even more happily. After Su Jing and Zheng Qi left, Zheng Qi and Yi Qingyu looked at each other. The enthusiasm of young people, it's been a long time since I last saw it. Zheng Qi sighed. Are you and I old? We're all so young, okay. Yi Qingyu glanced at him. Chapter 907. 5-time champion, do you want to win? Hey, Captain, you guys are back. Are you okay? Although it's vacation time now, Tiffin didn't disband immediately. Maybe many players were planning to go out and have fun during this rare vacation, but Zheng Qi collapsed as soon as he left the game. How heartless would it be to want to go out and have fun at this time? Obviously, the Tiffin players are not heartless people, so in the past 2 days, apart from visiting Zheng Qi in the hospital, they just strolled around and took a rest without thinking too much about other things. Under such circumstances, after Zheng Qi returned to the club, everyone immediately got the news of his return. Hearing Li Gurui's question, Zheng Qi immediately laughed out loud. What can happen? I was overdrawn before. I'll be back after 2 days of rest. But there are still more than 10 days before the competition starts. Our road to the 5-time champion will not be affected. Seeing Zheng Qi's vigorous appearance, most of the players were relieved. Only those who were more familiar with Zheng Qi looked at each other and felt that the matter seemed not simple. The others came up to congratulate and left one after another. With Zheng Qi's return, they put down their biggest worries in their hearts. After all, the 5th championship of the 5-time champion will be fought soon. It is impossible for them not to worry about Zheng Qi falling down at this time. No one wants to fall down before making history, especially in this way. And now that Zheng Qi is back, their worries are of course put down. The news didn't spread out, right? In case the media is hyping it up again. Zheng Qi asked Shinranofei as he walked. If it didn't spread out, we would have blocked it long ago. Shinranofei answered, then looked at Zheng Qi and stopped talking. What are you doing? Seeing Shinranofei, Zheng Qi, and Niaoliwa all looking at him, Zheng Qi couldn't help but ask. I have something else to ask you, are you really okay? Shinranofei didn't say anything, but Zheng Qi couldn't help but ask immediately. What problem can I have? Zheng Qi said calmly. Zheng Qi looked at Zheng Qi carefully again and again, but couldn't see any problem. Really? Zheng Qi asked doubtfully. You have to believe it even if it's fake, otherwise you can't play in the game, can't you win the 5-time championship? Zheng Qi immediately retorted. Zheng Qi choked. Okay, Zheng Qi said so, what else is there to disbelieve? I see he looks like a dragon and a tiger, he can kill 2 tigers. Zheng Qi immediately came out to smooth things over. Zheng Qi chuckled, then walked back to his room. Su Jing nodded to them and left as well. Do you really believe him? After Zheng Qi and Su Jing left, Zheng Qi asked Zheng Hai depressedly. Before Zheng Hai could answer, Niaoliwa pulled Zheng Qi. Does it matter whether it's true or not? Just like Zheng Qi said, even if it's false, we should treat it as true. Do you still want the 5-time champion? Niaoliwa said. Zheng Hai nodded. Yes, that's what I think. No matter what, there are only 5 games left, we have to win them all. Facing the world's strong players, now is the time to show our strength. Zheng Qi could only nod, and the words came to this point. Next, I will use all my strength, even if I die on the court, I will win this championship. Shinranofei suddenly said this, then left and walked towards his room. Zheng Hai and others looked at each other and nodded at the same time. At this time, these extraordinary Zheng Qi's earliest comrades in arms reached a consensus. These last few games must be won. They must get the unprecedented 5-time champion. This will be the best gift for them, and also that best gift for Zheng Qi. Shinranofei didn't know what others thought, but at this time, Shinranofei had an extremely strong feeling in his heart. If he couldn't get the 5-time champion, he might not have any chance to get the 5-time champion in the future. When the next day came, the extraordinary players who wanted to go out for a stroll were shocked to find that Shinranofei and others went directly into the training room and didn't come out. This only meant one thing, that is, this group of core players and Zheng Qi's best teammates had ended their vacation early and started their own training. This immediately made several extraordinary players feel embarrassed. These guys are all major shareholders of the club, each of them has a few % of the shares. To be frank, they are also their bosses. Now that the boss has given up his vacation early and started working overtime, should they also express their support? When they began to hesitate and entangle, the savior came. Liu Shibo and Bin Shikai, the remaining two core and god-level players of Extraordinary, appeared in front of them. As a result, the Fifan players surrounded them as if they saw a savior, and then began to ask Liu Shibo and Bin Shikai if they were going to give up their vacation to train. Liu Shibo and Bin Shikai's reactions were different. After listening to the others, Bin Shikai just laughed twice, and then said, "I'm old, there's no need to work so hard, I'd better take a good rest. I just have something to do at home, so I'll leave first, you guys can do whatever you want." After saying this, Bin Shikai waved his hand and left quickly. Seeing the oldest and most respected player in the club run away like this, the others were a little dumbfounded, and for a moment, all eyes were on Liu Shibo. Liu Shibo did not let them down. It's their own business to train. If you don't want to train, then don't train. After a season, everyone has worked hard. Training is freedom, and relaxation is also a good way to recover. If you don't want to go, then don't go. What's there to worry about? Seeing Liu Shibo waved his hand and said this, the extraordinary players nodded one after another and left the club one after another as if they had been pardoned. Only Liu Shibo's die-hard younger brother Chen Lin stayed there. He saw that Liu Shibo didn't move, so he didn't move either. "Boss, what are you going to do?" Chen Lin asked Liu Shibo. "To train. The 5-time champion is just around the corner. It's only a few days before I'm tired. Of course, I have to adjust my condition better and take a good look at the information of possible opponents." Liu Shibo replied with a smile. Then, Chen Lin was a little confused. "Are you wondering why I don't let others stay to train?" Liu Shibo asked with a smile. Chen Lin nodded. He really didn't understand. Since Liu Shibo thought that training was necessary at this time, why didn't he let others stay to train? "I think it's not necessary to rest at this time. You should rest after the game, but others may not think so. Look at their thoughts and reactions. They have wanted to rest for a long time. Why should I force them? What's more, the coach has given them a holiday. Do I need to do this? Shinranofei and others only train by themselves without calling others. This is also the meaning." Liu Shibo replied. "But we are facing the 5-time champion. Just like what you said, if we don't fight hard now, then when is it worth fighting hard?" Chen Lin continued to ask with some surprise. "Of course we can think so, but others may not think so. They are just ordinary players, not the main force or the core. They will try their best in the game, but it does not mean that they need to give up their vacation when they are already on vacation. Willing to give up is freedom, and unwilling to give up is also freedom. For things like extra training, we can only ask ourselves, and we can't force others, don't you think?" Liu Shibo smiled. "Well, but I still think that hard work is your own," Chen Lin said after thinking about it. "Of course, so I'm optimistic that you can become a great player." Liu Shibo patted Chen Lin on the shoulder and said with a smile. Chen Lin nodded vigorously. As the two talked, they walked into the training room side by side. In the coach's room not far away, Zhu Shan, who was watching them through the huge French window, couldn't help but laugh. "What's the matter?" Meng Fan asked without raising his head. "Seeing that these key guys are still working so hard, I feel relieved. Zheng Qi is back again, the 5-time champion, I am sure." Zhu Shan replied with a smile. "I told you a long time ago that there is no problem. It is normal for Zheng Qi to return. With his temper, let alone saying that he is fine, even if he is really sick, he has to take down the 5-time champion first and then go to recuperate." Meng Fan did not turn around, but answered like this. Zhu Shan did not notice anything wrong, because Meng Fan was working at this time. He never talked nonsense when he was working, and such performance was in line with his characteristics. Yeah, I was a little worried when he fell down before. Although we have 4 core players and god-level players in our team, we all know that Zheng Qi is still the most important person. Now that he is back, I feel relieved. Zhu Shan let out a long breath and said, "Don't be careless. We still lack experience in the world arena. The draw results have not come out yet, but we need to prepare well for several key opponents. The players should rest well during this period, otherwise we will be very tired," Meng Fan said in a deep voice. Zhu Shan nodded. He didn't think there was anything wrong with Meng Fan's reaction. Now is indeed the time for them to work hard. Before the World Cup starts, they should at least have a detailed and comprehensive understanding of the teams that will appear in the World Cup this year. But it is not easy to really get familiar with the opponent without personally competing against them, just watching the video and news of the game. As coaches, now is what they have to do. This is their battle. So Zhu Shan quickly returned to his position and started his work. This is the final struggle. Chapter 908. World Cup opponents. The internal affairs of FIFA have not been spread out, and there is no news from the outside world. This also proves from the side that the current composition of FIFA is indeed very pure. As mentioned before, the current composition of FIFA, who have really been in the league for many years, is nothing more than Bin Shikai, Liu Shibo, Shinryu Fei and Chen Lin. These are the only players among all FIFA players who have played professional games in other top clubs. They have only played in the top league for 1 or 2 years. Shinryu Fei is cold and unsociable. He is a training maniac. He has almost no good relationship with reporters, so naturally no one has the opportunity to ask him about anything. Liu Shibo is a member of the youth training team with a good background. He has contact with many reporters, but Liu Shibo is a low-key person. Even if there are a few reporters with good relationships, he will not casually tell the club's affairs. As for Chen Lin, he has always been relatively transparent, and reporters don't care about him. Some of the others are from the youth training of top clubs, but have never played professional games in this club. Others are standard grassroots. Although they have met some reporters in the past 2 years, they don't have a particularly good relationship with them. You know, many players in the top leagues have their own reporters, and they have very good relationships with these reporters. When they have nothing to do, they will take the initiative to reveal some gossip and information, so that reporters can get good benefits while also getting a lot of exposure for themselves. This is a necessary quality for almost every professional player beyond the professional level. But the extraordinary players do not have such qualities. They were just worried about Zheng Qi's health before, and now they will not reveal anything to the public. Therefore, the extraordinary preparations were not affected in this situation. The next preparations will indeed make the coaches more tired. They have to observe the situation of the teams participating in the next World Cup, especially those strong teams. The more they know, the better. But there are almost no weak teams participating in the World Cup, so Meng Fan and Zhu Shan have to observe almost every opponent carefully. This is a heavy task. Other teams that have participated in the World Cup for a long time, such as Changfeng and Teenhead, will not have such heavy work. After all, they have played against some opponents and are more familiar with them. FIFA's situation in the League and Cup this year meant that they had no time to consider dealing with opponents in the World Cup. In front of the 5-time champion, they needed to focus all their energy on the League and Cup. In this regard, Changfeng and Teenhead had an advantage. Although they had not played in the World Cup for a long time before Li Qing's and Lu Xiaoshan rose to prominence, they had not thought about winning the 5-time champion at the time. In the competition, there were always some champions that were lost in advance. They could focus more on the World Cup. After they had the experience of participating in or winning the World Cup, they would not be so tired when they wanted to challenge the 5-time champion. FIFA had to start all over again. Fortunately, the participating teams of the World Cup had already been announced, and some of their performance and information in the competition were not difficult to find. In the game, information was the easiest to find, and everyone could find it. In addition to the extraordinary team representing East Asia, the other teams participating in the World Cup are rallying from the United Arab Emirates, Melbourne Lightspeed, Africa, Ivory Coast Clover, New York Knicks, South America, River Plate, Liverpool, and Zenit. These are all strong teams and giants, and even giants that have existed in the professional football league 100 years ago. Of course, the New York Knicks are the exception. They were a basketball club before. After the outdoor sport suffered a devastating blow, it is easier to start over. Of course, these former top clubs, they have a mature system and the ability to transform, so in the football era, they are also that first to promote professionalization, but it is inevitable that some of the past drawbacks will be brought to the emerging league, which seems a bit out of place. This is also the reason why the level of the Chinese league is much higher than other teams, because they have grown up almost from scratch, although it seems a bit difficult for them at the beginning, but it also allows them to develop faster, and at the same time there are no deep-rooted problems. From the perspective of strength and level, each team is not bad, but relatively speaking, the level of the teams from West Asia, Australia and Africa is lower, while the level of the teams from the 4 divisions of Europe and America is better, and there is no difference between them. Zhu Shan raised his head and said to Meng Fan, "From the past World Cup, it can be seen that the 5 divisions of Europe, America and China have the highest probability of appearing in the semi-finals or even the finals. The teams from West Asia, Australia and Africa have rarely entered the semi-finals, and have never entered the finals. They are basically the role of accompanying the prince to study." Meng Fan nodded. "So we don't actually need to consider the teams from these 3 regions, just focus on the other 4 teams. After all, there is no problem for us to qualify in the group stage. The key is the next 2 elimination games." Zhu Shan said after thinking for a while. "That's what I think." Meng Fan nodded. Looking at their performance, the 3 teams are indeed a little worse. Whether it's Al-Ain, Melbourne Lightspeed or Seven Leaf Clover, their level is just the level of the middle-level teams in our league. There is no god-level player. The overall level is not bad, but compared with us, it is a level lower. Meng Fan continued to nod. "The next 4 opponents are different." Zhu Shan smiled. Meng Fan nodded silently. "Next, River Plate, Liverpool, Zenit. These are 4 clubs that make people respect just by looking at their names. This is even more true for people who are familiar with the history of sports 100 years ago. Among them, perhaps only Zenit is less famous, but Zenit also defeated countless strong teams to qualify from the Eastern European Division. In China, they have to defeat the various powerful teams in Moscow. In Eastern Europe, they face the encirclement and suppression of top powerful teams such as Steaua Bucharest, Dynamo Kyiv, Red Star Belgrade, etc. So they can fight their way out. Although many Western European teams have been mocking the Russian team for being the best in Eastern Europe to qualify for the World Cup, just like Chinese clubs mocking the West Asian clubs, Eastern Europe includes many more countries than Western Europe. Although the overall quality is weaker, the sufficient number alone can create enough pressure. The fact that the Russian team can almost monopolize the Eastern European qualification under such circumstances has already proved their excellent level. Of course, Western European teams are never weak. Although the number of participating countries in Western Europe is about half less than that in Eastern Europe, traditional powers such as Germany, Italy, Spain, the Netherlands, France, and Portugal are all in this division. It is completely imaginable what kind of earth-shattering and ghost-crying games this division will have in the annual qualifiers. How cruel is the Western European Division, which is known as the most difficult of the 8 major divisions in the world. The teams that qualify every year are different, and even the teams that qualify every year are not qualified to challenge for the 5-time champion, because even if they achieve excellent results in the Western European knockout rounds, it will almost certainly affect their performance in the league. Therefore, the Western European teams that enter the World Cup either lose the League Championship of the year, or lose the Cup Championship of the year. Even more unlucky, they lose both the League and Cup Championships. Similar to the situation of Russia, the American teams have also been smooth sailing in North America and the Caribbean. The most contention between them is still the competition between each other. The level of the American League is the only team that can compete with the Chinese League. It is also one of the only 3 countries in the world with 3-level leagues. The remaining one is Russia. The South American division is known as the Devil Division, second only to Western Europe. However, compared with the Western European division, which has at least 6 or 7 countries with the same level, South America is mainly dominated by the 3 powers of Brazil, Argentina and Uruguay. The strong teams in other countries such as Paraguay, Chile and Colombia can only create miracles occasionally. The teams that have made it out of this season should never be underestimated. From the perspective of personnel composition, their level is very high, similar to the top teams in our league, 2 to 3 god-level players, 7 or 8 commonly used main players, and the rest are substitute players whose strength is somewhat different from the main players, but not much different. This is enough for them to maintain sufficient combat effectiveness during the rotation. Meng Fan looked at the opponent's list and said, All strong teams are like this, otherwise it would be difficult to break through the siege. Zhu Shan nodded. In fact, Zhu Shan and Meng Fan did not care much about the strength of these opponents. After all, the teams that can make it through the Chinese division will not be afraid of any team in terms of overall strength. You must know that in this year's Chinese League, even if you don't count the three top teams Fifan, Changfeng and Tianhe, other traditional strong teams such as Kanning, Shenfeng, Shenhua, Jianlong also have such a configuration. 2 to 3 god-level players as the core, assisted by 7 or 8 strong main players, plus other outstanding players with the average level of the league. Such a team has the strength to impact the championship. Although there is a certain gap between other leagues and the Chinese League, the teams that can enter the World Cup must have such a configuration, and the qualifying teams of the United States and Russia, 2 leagues that can be compared with the Chinese League, are more outstanding. These are our opponents in the World Cup, let's get familiar with them slowly. Meng Fan said at last. Chapter 909. While the Fifan players were training hard, the Chinese media began to pay more and more attention to the upcoming World Cup. No matter how well the Chinese clubs performed in the World Cup, as the only most popular competitive sport now, every year's competition is a grand event, and the outstanding performance of Chinese clubs is almost like the monopoly of table tennis in the past. Of course, the media paid more attention to this. But even so, the media paid more attention to this year's World Cup than in previous years. They paid close attention last year because Changfeng also had the opportunity to win the 5-time championship, but unfortunately they were inexplicably defeated in the semi-finals and lost the opportunity to win the 5-time championship. When such an opportunity was lost, almost everyone was regretful, because Changfeng was almost the strongest team they had ever seen. They had the opportunity to win the 5-time championship for 2 consecutive years, which was something that Meng Fifan and Chen Feng's Nanguo team had not done. Of course, the reason why the South Country team failed to do so is not because of their strength. There are only a few teams that are capable and close to the 5 crowns. In the past 80 years, there are only 4 teams that have the opportunity to challenge the 5 crowns. It takes 20 years to have such a strong team. Just think about it and you will know how difficult it is. Changfeng did not succeed in the first year, and there was still the second year, but the second year was still a failure. Everyone knew that they would not have any chances in the future, because such a strong team can only stay together for 2 years. The departure of Jiang Wenqian and others before was already a very obvious example. Sure enough, they soon lost Shen Ruofei in the transfer market, and their overall strength dropped a lot. They no longer had the strength to suppress almost all opponents before. In this case, of course everyone sighed. They didn't know when they would see a team capable of winning the 5 crowns next time. There is only one such team every 20 years. The last 2 were in China, and the previous 2 were in Europe and South America. The probability of this is quite low. However, in the next year, another such team appeared. You know, after the formation of Fifan, although their momentum seems to be strong, the team looks very strong. With 4 core players and 4 god-level players, it can be called a super luxurious lineup, but in fact, neither professionals nor fans expect them to hit the 5-time champion. You know, the composition of a team is not that the more good players there are, the more combat effectiveness there is. The complementarity between them, the cooperation between them, and even the matching of characteristics, all play a big role, so signings are also a gamble for any giant. After all, before the game, no one knows what kind of performance the newcomers and old players can have together. The more successful examples of signings are Changfeng and Tianhe this year. The heavyweight signings have played an extremely good role, while the worst example is Shenhua last year. They already have 2 top god-level players, Yimo and Fan Yuan. After introducing a quasi-god-level player Fan the 11th, on paper, the offensive lineup has been perfect, but in the past 2 years, they have not been able to integrate well together, and their performance is not as good as before. This is a more depressing example. However, even so, the team cannot avoid recruiting new players. Even if you don't know whether the result of the recruitment is good or not, you have to do it, because if you don't do it, there will be no progress. Fifan is like this. They look very awesome when they look at their lineup, but in fact many people can find their faults. The 4 core players are their main force and the foundation of their survival. However, among these 4 god-level players, 3 are the best newcomers in the past 3 years. Everyone knows that the best newcomer means that the player will have a good future and room for development in the future, but it does not prove that he will definitely become a top player. Having the ability to become a top player and becoming a top player are 2 completely different concepts. Zheng Qi, Shen Ruofei, and Liu Shibo are all still young and do not have enough experience. The remaining one, Zheng Qi, is experienced enough, but he is also old. He was 32 last year and 33 this year. He also lacks experience in winning championships. He has been fighting in the middle-level Team Thunder. He has enough ordinary experience, but he still lacks high-end experience. Apart from these 4 core players, there are only 8 or 9 players who are truly at the level of the Super League among the other 18 players at FIFN. It can be said that if the other half of the players were not in FIFN, if they did not have those top accounts, they would not be worthy at being players in the Super League. They can only make do in the A-League. On the surface, the A-League and the Super League seem to be only one level apart, but in reality, there is a huge gap. This can be seen from Zheng Qi. They spent a lot of money before, and Zheng Qi was also a strong team in the A-League. They did not enter the Super League because they were unlucky or targeted by other teams. However, after the introduction of Zheng Qi, they have successfully retained their position in the Super League. Their players have basically changed. Players who can call the shots in the A-League may not be able to do so in the Super League. If there is no such a big change, replacing all their first-team players with players who have proven their level in the Super League, then Zheng Qi may return to the A-League. With a combination of people like FIFN, it is still possible to achieve good results. After all, the 4 God-level players are also veritable God-level players. Their performance alone is enough for FIFN to achieve quite good results, not to mention that all their players have such strong roles. Last year, FIFN was able to get a runner-up and a 3rd place. This year, it is entirely possible for them to win 1 or 2 championships. If they are lucky, they can even get 1 or 2 more. But the 5-time champion, that's too much to take for granted. Apart from anything else, the Super Cup is not easy to pass. Although Zheng Qi's strength has declined, it is still possible to block FIFN, who has not yet started to run in. The situation of FIFN's 4 God-level players holding together will not last too long. At most 1 or 2 years, Zheng Qi's state will decline, and Shinryo Fei or Liu Shibo will also leave to be their own thighs. It is almost predictable. If you can't get the 5-time champion this year, you can make another impact next year. If you still can't get it, then FIFN will have no chance. But who would have known that in this year, when everyone thought they could lay a good foundation, FIFN won 4 championships in one go and began a fierce attack on the 5-time champion. Who could have thought of this at the beginning? You have to know that FIFN did not come easily along the way, but was almost walking on thin ice all the time. The Super Cup against Zheng Qi was very difficult to win. In the following league, although he won consecutive victories and topped the list, he could not relax for a moment under the fierce pursuit of Zheng Qi and Tinhead. In the second half of the game, it was even more so. The so-called counter-attack of the old forces has always been extremely fierce. FIFN was able to persist, which was indeed very remarkable. So far, except for the East Asian Cup, which was relatively easy to win, which other championships were not won with great difficulty. Under such difficult circumstances, FIFN still won 4 championships, which invisibly made others seem to have more confidence in them. To be frank, the 4 teams that had a chance to win the 5-time championship were all pretty much the same. The 2 foreign teams were both defeated by the Chinese team in the World Cup. The Nanguo team this year and Changfeng team last year were basically invincible in the league, but they were also defeated by their opponents in the World Cup. This was not accidental. After all, a club has been going smoothly for too long, and it is inevitable that they will be unable to respond. Once a situation that they cannot control arises, they will be easily at a loss. In this competition system where no mistakes can be made, a moment of loss can have a huge impact and consequences. And what about FIFN? They have gone through countless tests along the way. Such a team will not relax at the World Cup. They will fight to the last minute. FIFN is the first team that is not strong enough to have an absolute advantage but can fight to this point. Because the 5-time champion competition system is too strict, basically all the previous teams have used a season to lay that foundation, such as winning a league championship or a cup championship first, so that they can impact the Super Cup championship in the second year. After all, without the Super Cup championship, there is no qualification to participate in the Intercontinental Cup, and without the Intercontinental Cup championship, there is no qualification to participate in the World Cup. FIFN only won a runner-up, but he was also qualified to participate in the Super Cup. They are now 5 games away from the 5-time champion. This is an ending that makes people look forward to it. After so many years of the football-era professional league, this is the 3rd time that a Chinese club has a team qualified to sprint for the 5-time champion. Things are never more than 3 times. If there is a first 5-time champion, it should of course be the team with the highest level in the current Chinese league. This is the unanimous wish of everyone. Of course, they are looking forward to the moment when Fifan wins the 5-time champion. At the time, the Chinese league will undoubtedly reach its true peak. And the gold content of this 5-time champion can also be guaranteed. Everyone knows how hard those teams in the Super League have worked to stop Fifan. But it still can't be stopped. Then Fifan certainly deserves the unprecedented honor of the 5-time champion. Chapter 910. Don't worry about anything else. The media and fans are all looking forward to the moment when Fifan wins the 5-time championship, but it is obvious that the 5-time championship is not so easy to get. Perhaps because of the curse, the moment when Fifan saw Zheng Qi fall, they all began to think that the 5-time championship should not have been won. Fortunately, Zheng Qi returned to the team soon, which made them feel much more at ease. This does not include Su Jin, of course. She knows Zheng Qi's current problems, and knows how much pain and pressure Zheng Qi is actually under in the next training. However, she did not say anything, because she knew that this was Zheng Qi's choice, and it was also that choice that Fifan must make. For Fifan, the most indispensable thing for them now is Zheng Qi. Whether psychologically or in the actual meaning of the game, Zheng Qi is the most important person. So Zheng Qi cannot show any abnormality, and in training, he should still be the one who works the hardest. Because he has always done this. The preparations for the next game are very strict. Although there is not much basic training, there is no shortage of targeted training. For the important opponents they might meet next, they will compare them one by one, and try to understand each other better, so that they can be better prepared in the competition. In fact, we don't need to worry too much about this. We are unfamiliar with them, and they're unfamiliar with us. We can only collect game videos, but we don't have a close experience. Everyone is the same at the beginning. Zheng Qi said to Fifan and other players. Others nodded repeatedly. This is reasonable. Everyone's conditions are the same. When the time comes in the game, it still depends on the performance and level, as well as the tactical arrangement. Fifan's advantage lies in the high overall attribute points of their players, so that many tactics that anyone can think of but cannot achieve have the possibility of implementation just like the legendary martial arts in the past. What moves can only work under equal conditions. Facing a monster with a punch of 10,000 pounds, no matter how exquisite your moves are, it's useless. Although Fifan does not have such an overwhelming advantage now, at least they have some advantages in attribute points. Another advantage of Fifan lies in Zheng Qi. His on-the-spot command and operation level are the key to Fifan's continuous targeting in the league and cup this season, but he can still be invincible and rush all the way. His command level is not much worse than Li Qing's, and his operation level is not much worse than Lu Xiaoshan. He can rush to the front line and can also feel the changes in the battlefield most keenly at the front line, and then conduct targeted tactical commands. Li Qing's and Lu Xiaoshan, the two top players who have dominated the world for the past 6 years, have shown their advantages in Zheng Qi alone. Not to mention that he has top god-level players like Shen Ruofei, Liu Shibo and Bin Shikai to help him. Even if he doesn't, he is with a group of professional players at the Super League level, which is enough to perform at the top level. Fifan has encountered many difficulties this year, but it has also greatly trained their fighting spirit and level. This is an iron army built in the flames of war. This itself is the kingly way to whether a team is strong. The stronger it is, the smaller the loss caused by accidents. They have reason to be so confident. In the eyes of the media and fans, these 20 days are like a year, but for the extraordinary players, they passed very quickly. The World Cup is coming soon. And the day before the World Cup grouping finally appeared. Like all other cup competitions, the World Cup grouping and matchup situation are not revealed until the game starts. This is also a decision made to maximize the surprises of the game. This is also one of the key factors that make it so difficult to win the 5-time champion. The grouping results are released late, and you only know who your opponent is the day before the game starts. Then it is more difficult to prepare and it is more difficult to achieve good results. However, because all teams are like this, it seems very fair. According to the historical results of the league, Extraordinary is undoubtedly in the first tier. Another first-tier team is the New York Knicks. The second-tier teams are Zenit of Russia and Liverpool of the United Kingdom. The third-tier teams are River Plate of Argentina and Ivory Coast Clover. The fourth-tier teams are Al Ain and Melbourne Lightspeed. Among the 8 participating teams, there are 5 strong teams and 3 weak teams, so the group stage will be very interesting, because one group is destined to be much stronger than the other. What's more, Zenit, one of the second-tier strong teams, is basically a team of the same level as the Knicks. Whichever group they're in, the pressure on the group will be even greater. If the third-tier team in this group is still from South America, then this group will definitely be a death group. Unless the Russian team and the South American team are not in the same group, then the strength of this group is relatively balanced. The Chinese media and fans have known this for a long time, so they have been discussing whether FIFA can have better luck this time. For example, Zenit and River Plate are in the same group, but FIFA is in another group, avoiding three strong teams, Knicks, Zenit and River Plate. In such a group, if the opponent wants to qualify, they have to fight hard for several games, and the overdraft will definitely be large. FIFA can easily win after qualifying. The World Cup has 5 games, but there is only half a month, and 1 game every 3 days. It is a huge test for any team. This is also one of the reasons why the 5-time champion did not appear. No matter how strong the team is, it is inevitable that there will be mistakes in such a schedule. If you want to win the championship, luck is a big factor. The expectations of the Chinese media and fans are beautiful, but the reality is cruel. FIFA's players are not so naive, especially after seeing Zheng Qi's wonderful performance in the Classic Football World Cup. The captain is in our team, how can we draw a good lot? Liga Rui said. The others rushed up and beat him up, and then said, you're right. This is also that fact. When the draw results came out, the media and fans were in mourning, while the FIFA players just said oh and went to do what they had to do. FIFA was mentally prepared for what team to be grouped with, and now it just became a reality. FIFA was in Group A, with Zenit, River Plate, and Melbourne Lightspeed. This was the worst draw, but in the eyes of the FIFA players, if it wasn't the worst draw, it would be really wrong. With Zheng Qi's infuriating luck, it would be wrong if he didn't get such a group. But playing in this group is nothing more than fighting one game at a time. You have to know that when studying the opponents, they focused on these opponents. As long as they can beat 2 of them, they can play in the knockout stage. The second place in the group can also went to the knockout stage. Zheng Qi and his team don't care what identity they enter the knockout stage, but of course, in order to boost their morale, they have to win the first place in the group. The most important thing is that if you win the first place in the group, you can play the second place in the other group first. Last year, Zheng was too confident in their own strength. After winning 2 consecutive games in the first 2 rounds of the group stage and having already qualified, they hid Lu Xiaoxun and other core players. As a result, Lu Xiaoxun and his team had a good rest, but they met the strongest opponent in the first knockout match, and with some additional factors, they lost the game. Therefore, FIFA had no intention of relaxing in the game. Although from the perspective of the schedule, they would first play against the weakest Melbourne Lightspeed, then the second strongest River Plate, and finally against Zenit, such a schedule is still relatively favorable for FIFA. They would win the previous 2 games first, and then the last game, and they could play the last game with the least pressure. It's impossible for us to play without pressure, don't be too naive. Teams from other continents are celebrating Zheng's defeat last year. They must want to stop us for 2 consecutive years. This will shrink the advantage of the Chinese team in the World Cup and give them more confidence. So any team will try their best when facing us. After all, we are just a new team to them. Even if we have an extremely good level, we still lack experience. Compared with Zheng and Tin He, who dominated the World Cup for 4 years, we are still relatively young. Meng Fan said to all the players at FIFA. TSK, we have already beaten Zheng and Tin He in the League and Cup. Liga Rui said disdainfully. Don't be too proud. Wang Yuanfen said to him. Seeing that the topic seemed to be going off, Zhu Shang coughed and pulled the words back. So in the next games, we have to go all out in every game. If the opponent is strong, we have to beat them. If the opponent is weak, we have to blow them up. We don't have a long history, but this year, we want to create a new history. Nothing can stop us. Melbourne Lightspeed is at best a mid-level team. We should beat them first and let them see what a strong team is. Zhu Shan said. Don't you want to hold back a little bit? Asked the more mature and steady Lianzhou. No, in this process, we have shown our best. After a season, we can't hold back anymore. Instead of shrinking back, we might as well show off our full strength. At least we can demonstrate. Let the next opponent feel panic about us, and then we will have won half the battle. Meng Fan replied. Then show yourself well. Don't count this and that like those old-fashioned teams. There are only 5 games in total. What's there to count? As long as we perform well, then there will be absolutely no team that can stop us. Zheng Qi waved his fist and shouted, and his shout immediately ignited the passion of all the extraordinary players. Chapter 911 Things to do. In the final analysis, Zheng Qi is still the spiritual core and leader of FIFA. In this regard, although Zheng Qi seems to show characteristics that are not like a core or a prestigious person, whether a player is a spiritual leader and a prestigious person in a club depends not only on his character, but also on what he has done. What did Zheng Qi do? Zheng Qi did everything. He laid the foundation of Fifen Club as the core, he established the club, he owns the largest share of the club, and even Fifen's achievements along the way were mostly driven by him. Although Fifen now has many outstanding players, Zheng Qi is still the core one. Such a status is not obtained casually. In the top leagues in the past 2 seasons, Zheng Qi often carried everyone forward together. Everyone can see this. He is a major shareholder, but his position on the field depends on his own performance. Fifen has been a gathering of good players from the beginning. If he is not of a sufficient level, why should he be the core? And Zheng Qi has always been the core of Fifen. Whether it is in the Yamato League, the first-class league, or the current Super League, when so many top players have been introduced. He is the core. He has never missed any of Fifen's games. Maybe he didn't perform well in every game, but most of the time, his performance was a crucial part of Fifen's victory. How could such a person not be important? So when he fell, many Fifen players felt that the sky had fallen. They had become accustomed to relying on Zheng Qi. Compared with Zheng Qi, Shin Rao-Fei, Liu Shibo and Bin Shikai were also very good, but not as reliable as Zheng Qi. So after Zheng Qi came back 2 days later, many people felt at ease. Players of Shin Rao-Fei's level would not be discouraged when Zheng Qi fell, but would think that they would stand up and carry the team forward. After Zheng Qi came back, although they still had doubts in their hearts, they knew that in such a game, they still had to rely on Zheng Qi. Zheng Qi was their core. He could do everything on the court. Shin Rao-Fei was good at frontal assault, Liu Shibo was good at defensa, and Bin Shikai was good at taking advantage of loopholes, but Zheng Qi could do everything. Maybe he was not as good as them in terms of specialization, but in terms of comprehensive strength, even Lu Xiaoxin or Li Qing's might not be as good as Zheng Qi. This, even Shin Rao-Fei and Liu Shibo were extremely surprised. Because they were relatively familiar with Zheng Qi, but they did not expect that Zheng Qi could have such strength and level now. This was beyond their imagination. Zheng Qi himself did not care much about this. He had been very good for a long time, and he knew it himself. In fact, when he played in amateur competitions, his operation level was already quite good, otherwise Lu Xiaoxin would not have thought of introducing Zheng Qi at the time, because he saw that Zheng Qi's operation level certainly had many areas that were not proficient, but the talent he showed was simply amazing. In the game of the football era, the level of operation and speed are actually not a great thing. If you pile up the attribute points, anyone can do it quickly. However, maintaining accuracy and speed is a test of a player's talent and level. How fast can you maintain the most accurate shot? This is a problem that many professional players need to find and consider, because the addition of attribute points is very particular, especially the speed. It is not that the more you add, the better the effect. If the speed is extremely fast, but your operation cannot keep up and you cannot hit the opponent's vital points, then no matter how fast you are, it will be useless. Just like having 1,000 pounds of force, you have to hit the opponent to have an effect. If you can't hit the opponent, it's all in vain. Professional players often change other attribute points, only speed is fixed. After many experiments, they know that they can perform the best operation at this speed. Even if there is a fine-tuning, it is only because of progress or regression, so fine-tuning will be made. What about Zheng Qi at the time? No matter how fast, he is always very accurate, and the speed of his operation is not fixed. The only thing in common is that no matter what speed, he can maintain extremely accurate. This is an extremely strong operation talent, which is even stronger than Shin Rao-Fei at the time, so Lu Xiaoxin would take a fancy to Zheng Qi. Of course, Zheng Qi rejected him. In the following games, Zheng Qi actually had no room for improvement in operation. With his operation level that even Lu Xiaoxin would be amazed at, the next game was nothing more than for him to accumulate enough experience. The experience accumulated by last season was almost enough. To put it in a more vulgar way, Zheng Qi at the time had reached his limit. The following classical football game was an opportunity for him to improve his strength. Although the two are somewhat different, they actually improved his vision and allowed him to better consider everything from a global perspective in the game. The previous Zheng Qi was like a sharp edge leaking out, with an imposing aura. Now Zheng Qi hides his edge inside and waits for an opportunity to move. Two knives of the same sharpness, one slashes randomly, and the other seizes the opportunity to attack again. The effect formed will of course be very different. Zheng Qi is now the latter. There is no room for improvement in his operation level, but the level he can play is better than before. Zheng Qi's points are extremely abnormal now. His physical points are just ordinary points, which makes him seem to be easily killed on the court. However, he has increased his speed to the limit of 200, which makes him move faster than anyone else on the court and can also have precise attacks. Most of the time, he is hidden on the court, and he will attack at the critical moment and kill with one blow. So in this year's game, just looking at the performance on the court, Zheng Qi seems to be overshadowed by the brilliance of Shinryo and others. However, in various offensive statistics, he ranks first, not the first in the team, but the first in the entire league. In the game, the average number of kills per game and the number of key attacks to open the situation, these two data the defensive players value most, he ranks first, and he has left the second place behind by a lot. For example, the average number of kills, the traditional three killers Sun Fei, Daixing Fan Juan, their data has not decreased, and they still kill 5 to 6 opponents per game on average, which is already a very scary data. But what about Zheng Qi? His average kills per game are 8.6 times, which is more than a quarter of the number of opponents. As for the key offensive statistics, this item has always been Lu Xiaoxin's private domain. He averaged 4 to 5 key offensive times per game, which made him always the best in the entire league. Last year, Shinryo once caught up with him, but that was also because Lu Xiaoxin obviously reduced the number of his official shots. This year, Lu Xiaoxin, who took on the responsibility of changing things at offensive again, got better data than before. He hit 5 points and 1 offensive times per game this year, which was the highest data in his entire career. Zheng Qi hit 6 points and 8 times. These two key statistics are enough to prove that Zheng Qi's performance this year is also a peak. Fifen has achieved results that almost no team can achieve this year. In addition to their overall excellence, Zheng Qi's personal outstanding performance is also a huge key. A captain has achieved unprecedented results with his own performance. Of course, his words have unparalleled authority in the team. This is not only the old god-level player Bin Shikai, but also the newly joined Shinryo and Liu Xibo. Therefore, Zheng Qi's words immediately ignited the passion of all Fifen players, and at the same time, they began to welcome the next game with the best fighting spirit. Fifen's tactical strategy has been decided. That is to play bravely and fearlessly one game after another, use all the things you know, form a crushing trend, and at the same time accumulate the morale and fighting spirit of the team, so as to create enough psychological pressure on the opponent. No one will die in the game, the worst case is a loss, but if a team can always beat the opponent by a large score, then their opponents will definitely have considerable psychological pressure. You must know that professional players are more capable of bearing pressure, but at the same time, they themselves are under more pressure. Any additional pressure may cause them problems. Fifen knows clearly that they still lack experience, but lack of experience does not mean that they lack strength. Since they lack the experience of cautiously confronting the opponent, then they should not be cautious, and play the momentum and fighting will of their young players to defeat one opponent after another. Since the group stage is easy first and difficult later, then increase the pressure on their opponents little by little. If Fifen can win against a weaker team, the opponent may laugh at them for not holding back. If they can win against a stronger team next time, the opponent will be on high alert. If they can win against the strongest opponent, any opponent will be afraid of them. A ruthless and extremely powerful team will also make people feel scared. Especially since they are a new team. If it is a team that often participates in the World Cup, even if they perform the strongest, the opponent will still think about how to kill them after adapting. It's different for new teams. The opponent also needs a process of adaptation. When the opponent always appears to be very strong and brutal, their fear is simply unavoidable. Next, what they have to do is to establish their prestige. Chapter 912. Establishing authority. On the day the World Cup started, Fifen, like in the East Asian Cup, entered a relatively closed space until the end of the World Cup. When they participated in the East Asian Cup before, Fifen was a bunch of bumpkins who didn't know what fun places there were. But this time, they knew that they could have almost supreme enjoyment in such a space, but they didn't care. They just wanted to win the championship. If they win this championship, they will be the unprecedented 5-time champions. At the time, they could live on this title for the rest of their lives. What else? The status of professional games in the football era is far higher than any other sports in the past. For such a national sport, professional players are already the pinnacle of social class, not to mention creating a miraculous record that has never been created by predecessors. In such a situation, the Fifen players will certainly not be distracted. Such a great record is worth everything. Even Zheng Qi, who doesn't really care about honor, is risking his life to win the final championship, which is enough to prove everything. Melbourne Lightspeed's level is average, and they don't have any particularly outstanding players in their team. However, as the Australian champions, their overall strength is not bad. Almost every player is at the level of our top league players. Such overall strength is the key to their dominance in Australia. However, we shouldn't have any problems with such a team, right? Before the first round of the game, Zhu Shan said to the extraordinary players with a smile. The extraordinary players nodded one after another. This is indeed the case. There is no need for them to worry about a team like Melbourne Lightspeed. In fact, in the previous preparations, Meng Fan and Zhu Shan of Extraordinary also focused on the 4 teams in Europe and America, and ignored the opponents in Africa, Australia and West Asia. Because the teams from these 3 continents have rarely qualified from the group stage, let alone entering the finals. In addition to the Chinese teams, the 4 teams in Europe and America can have good results in the World Cup. Melbourne Lightspeed is a giant team in Australia. They almost always sweep all opponents to enter the World Cup every year, and then they lose 2 or 3 games in the World Cup and come back obediently. Their overall level is overwhelming in Australia, but that is because they concentrate all the best players. In this case, their overall pressure is too small, which leads to the players not being able to develop better. Occasionally, there are a few talented players who cannot get better training and improvement under such circumstances. And those geniuses often choose to play in European leagues to train themselves, but in that case, they will not represent Melbourne Lightspeed to participate in the World Cup. In this way, Melbourne Lightspeed has always been in such an embarrassing situation. They can dominate in Australia, but in the World Cup, they are just standard underdogs, just like the teams in West Asia. However, West Asia at least has several teams of the same level, and the competition between them is still very fierce, which makes them slowly improve. African teams are better in this regard. After all, they also have a large population and a large number of countries. The confrontation between them is always fierce. Although the overall level is relatively weak, it is difficult to train players well even if the competition is fierce. However, their ability to withstand pressure is much better than that of Melbourne Lightspeed. So if you calculate carefully, Melbourne Lightspeed can be said to be the weakest team in the World Cup. FIFAN and 2 strong teams are in the same group, so the remaining weak team in this group can be regarded as a compensation. But FIFAN doesn't care about this. No matter what the opponent is, they will beat the opponent. Although they are a seeded team, they are a new team. A new team, if it wants to establish its own image in the World Cup, it must establish its prestige. Now is the time to establish its prestige. Facing a weak team, Melbourne Lightspeed is in bad luck. Before the game started, the players of Melbourne Lightspeed didn't feel anything. After all, they participate in the World Cup almost every year, and the World Cup is not unfamiliar to them. No matter how important the event is, if you participate every year, you won't be too excited. Just like no matter how delicious the food is, if you can eat it every day, you won't be moved by it. Moreover, Melbourne Lightspeed plays the role of accompanying the prince to study in the World Cup every year, so it is even less exciting. Playing 3 games and then going home is really not exciting, but they still have some hope for today's game. FIFAN is a new team after all. Indeed, from the information obtained before, this new team is not easy to deal with. Not only is it difficult to deal with, they're undefeated in the Chinese Super League this season and have scored more than 100 points, which is simply scary. However, no matter how scary it is, they are just a new team, and except for one player over 30, most of the players are only in their early 20s. Such an age shows that they are not very mature mentally. They are participating in a top event like the World Cup and facing the critical juncture of the 5-time champion. Under such pressure, it seems normal for young players to have emotional breakdowns. The players of Melbourne Lightspeed are experienced. Their age structure is reasonable. There are veterans, legitimate players, and talented young players in the team. Such a team will perform very steadily. So in their opinion, they may not be able to defeat FIFAN, but they can find ways to cause a lot of trouble to FIFAN. As long as they can cause enough trouble to FIFAN, even if they lose in the end, FIFAN will suffer a great blow in the next game. If River Plate and Zenit perform better and defeat FIFAN continuously, this team that wants to hit the 5-time champion may die directly in the group stage. You should know that there are very few teams that are qualified to hit the 5-time champion. In this World Cup, only FIFAN is qualified to hit the 5-time champion. In the past World Cups, it was very common that none of the 8 participating teams were qualified to hit the 5-time champion. And now Fifan still has the opportunity to hit the 5-time champion, which itself makes them the target of public criticism. A weak team like Melbourne Lightspeed consciously took on such a task. Even if they can't beat their opponents, they have to give them enough blows. They walked onto the field of the game with confidence. The map slowly opened in front of them. Changping. In fact, this kind of map is called Changping in China, and it is called something else in other countries. It is basically related to the history of each country, and there will be no special changes in the competition between countries. In short, this kind of map is not really a replica of the historical Battle of Changping. When seeing this map, the players of Melbourne Lightspeed were quite happy. After all, on such a map, experience is more important. After playing more games on such a map, when an accident occurs, the probability of instinctive dodge success will be much higher. However, what they don't know is that for the extraordinary players, they don't need instinct. Their training room can simulate more than 80% of the details of such a map. The opponents in other leagues can only simulate 60% to 70% of the details at most. This is only possible for the highest level team in that Chinese Super League. For teams in other leagues, being able to simulate 50% to 60% is already amazing. They rely more on experience. The current advantage of extraordinary in the league is not just one aspect, but advantages in various aspects, which allow them to achieve such an outstanding level. From this point of view, no team has ever been stronger than them. Of course, Melbourne Lightspeed is not good either. In terms of familiarity with the map, Fifan is at least twice as good as Melbourne Lightspeed. And their strength is much better than Melbourne Lightspeed. In addition, their condition in the first game was quite good, and they also wanted to establish their prestige in the game. As a result, Melbourne Lightspeed was in trouble. When the two sides came into contact on the field, Fifan did not have any intention of being cautious. They quickly launched an attack. They had seen the level of Melbourne Lightspeed very clearly in the video, which was just that level. Although they could not be defeated casually, as long as they played seriously, it was impossible for them to fail. Facing such an opponent, Fifan was quite confident. No probing, just a fierce attack. Melbourne Lightspeed was immediately killed. Shin Fei took the lead, Zheng Qi and Bin Shikai supported him. With these three top players as the core, Fifan quickly broke the opponent's defense and scored a goal. In the next game, Fifan started to play at his own pace. The four core players took turns to play, and the others also took turns to play. However, even so, Melbourne Lightspeed could not withstand the impact of these core players. Any two of them on the court were not resisted by any player of Melbourne Lightspeed, and Melbourne Lightspeed could not use a large number of people to encircle them. After all, Fifan's other players were not bad. Even if the substitutes were a little worse, they could show their advantages in attribute well under the leadership of the main players. Melbourne Lightspeed collapsed like this. They were continuously attacked and suppressed by Fifan in the first half, and lost 4 goals in a row. In this case, they still maintained their fighting spirit, because although they lost 4 goals in the first half, they were not impossible to catch up. If they were luckier in the second half when the field changed, the opponent made more mistakes, and slowly caught up with a few balls, which made them feel anxious. They could still do it. The players of Melbourne Lightspeed thought so at hope. However, what they didn't know was that a bigger nightmare was still waiting for them in the second half. Fifan, who wants to establish his authority in this game, will certainly not let them go easily. Si estes escuchando esta novela en un canal distinto a mundo fanfic novelas, significat lo descarga and y subir en sinisfuerzos invitamos cordialmente a visitar nuestro canal. Mundo fanfic novelas all encontras la versión original de esta historia y podrás explorar muchas otras novelas de diversos narradores. Te esperamos para sumergirte en un mundo de novelas increíbles. Chapter 913. Lack of experience. Thinking back to the World Cup of classical football, we also established our prestige in the first game. Thinking back, I'm really happy. When the whistle sounded at the end of the game, Zheng Qi said with great satisfaction. Fifan's players laughed out loud, thinking that Zheng Qi was right. Then they began to celebrate with each other. In the background, the players of Melbourne Lightspeed were in despair. Countless Chinese fans in the stand cheered. Although they knew that Fifan would win this game, they still did not expect that he would win so fiercely. 13-0, Fifan completely destroyed Melbourne Lightspeed in the second half of the game. 4-0 in the first half. In fact, Fifan did not give his all, but played slowly. It was not that they were holding back, but that they wanted to get more familiar with the opponent to see if the opponent had anything hidden. Facts proved that there was no. And they were more familiar with the map of the Battle of Changping than their opponents. Without any concerns, Fiffin's players began to kill the Melbourne Lightspeed players who wanted to use the random changes in the map in the second half to create opportunities were collectively dumbfounded. When the map changes, the extraordinary players often dodge it at the first time, and they will react a little slower, more or less disturbed, and then those opponents whose attributes are obviously higher than theirs will start to take advantage of the opportunity to shoot. How to fight against opponents with higher attributes and better chances than them? Just thinking about it makes it difficult to fight. So soon, after losing 2 goals again in the second half, the Melbourne Lightspeed players completely collapsed. In the first half, they hoped that the opponent would not perform well, but the opponent performed very well. In the second half, they hoped that the changes in the map would help, but it helped the opponent instead. After all their hopes were shattered, their fighting spirit would of course no longer exist. In addition, the extraordinary performance in the second half was actually much better than the first half, so this tragedy occurred. 13-0. In the Football Era World Cup, there are very few such big scores. Although it is normal to score many goals in the football era, it is considered a lot to score 6 or 7 goals in a game. In many games, 1 or 2 goals determine the outcome. After all, there are not many teams that can have such strong control. The World Cup is at least the highest level of competition. The teams that can come to this stage are all the strongest teams in each region. Even if there is a gap between them, it is often not so big. At the same time, those strong teams basically participate in the World Cup frequently. It is good enough to win a game. They don't have to beat the opponent too badly to waste their energy. Fiffen didn't think so. They really didn't give any face. The opponent's fighting spirit had collapsed, but they still didn't give up and continued to chase the opponent and beat him. In a short time, they beat 13-0. This is the game with the largest score difference in the history of the World Cup. No wonder the players of Melbourne Lightspeed want to cry but have no tears. Fiffen's fans are of course extremely excited. Their team set a new record as soon as they arrived at the World Cup. How can they not be happy? You have to know that the World Cup has been established for decades, and many records have reached a very high level. It is difficult to break them, even approaching them. As a result, Fiffen broke a record right away. How could they not be excited? Similarly, Fiffen's players were also very excited. When they came to participate in the World Cup, they were indeed a little cautious and careful. After all, this is the World Cup, which theoretically represents the highest level in the world. And this overwhelming victory immediately reassured the Fiffen players. Although the World Cup is the World Cup, it does not mean that the level is the highest. Just like the previous Classic Football World Cup, the reputation and status are indeed the highest, but many games are not as good as the European Champions Cup. At least a team like Melbourne Lightspeed is at best a mid to low level team in that Chinese Super League, and may have to stay in the league every year. They don't have any outstanding players in their team. Although their strength is very average, Fiffen is really not afraid of such a team. Even with their characteristics, playing against such a team seems more experienced and easier. They have a group of players with outstanding strength and characteristics. The other players' operation level is a little worse, but the super high attributes can make up for this. Therefore, the so-called average level of the opponent is not enough to make them feel threatened, and it is easier to win. Of course, even if Fiffen plays against the relegation team in the league, it will not easily win double-digit victories. Although Melbourne Lightspeed is not very strong, it is at least at the level of a mid to lower level team, and the gap in strength with Fiffen is not that big. But the key is that Melbourne Lightspeed is not familiar with Fiffen. This kind of familiarity can only be gradually established through real games. Melbourne Lightspeed made many mistakes in the confrontation, and Fiffen was thinking about establishing its prestige in this game, so it played such a big lead. They are also very wrong, but not very wrong. If they defend patiently and concentrate on just wanting to drag Fiffen with their level, even if they still lose, they will only lose a few balls and will not be beaten so badly. But they thought too much and wanted to create more trouble for Fiffen in the game. After the psychological gap, it seemed a little worse. In fact, after they lost 2 goals in a row at the beginning of the second half, the game was completely out of control. If Fiffen didn't want to establish his authority, maybe he would relax his offensive a little, but Fiffen wanted to establish his own image in the World Cup, so of course he would take the opportunity to beat the fallen dog. This Chinese team actually set a record as soon as they arrived. After watching the live broadcast of this game, in another space of the competition venue, a black youth with dreadlocks said disdainfully. This statement itself is very admirable, but his tone seems so disdainful. But he has reason to be disdainful, because he is the core player of the Knicks, nicknamed Lightning Red Hodgson. As the core player of the Knicks, he is one of the best attackers in the American Super League. There are very few players in the entire league who can compete with him and Ifnsa. To make an inappropriate analogy, his status in the American Super League, even if it is not as good as Lu Xiaoxin's status in the Chinese Super League, can at least be compared with Fan Yuan and Sun Fei. After all, the American Super League is also full of strong teams and good players. There are no less than 20 players who can be compared with the Chinese god-level players. This FIFA is a new team. It is normal that they are not familiar with the World Cup. Their average age is relatively young, so it is normal that they can't stop fighting for a while. A white young man with short hair beside him answered with a smile. Hodson nodded. He valued this person's work very much. For the strong team Knicks, if Hodson is the fierce general who charges forward, then this white young man, Tony Wilson, who is 2 years younger than Hodson, is the commander who controls the entire team. In other words, these two people are Lu Xiaoxin and Li Qing's, who are smaller than Knicks. In terms of characteristics, it is true that in the past 4 years, Knicks have participated in the World Cup for 2 years and won the World Cup championship once. That is, last year, they defeated Zheng Qi in the semi-finals and then defeated Zenit in the finals to win the championship. This World Cup, they came as the defending champions. Of course, they valued FIFA's performance very much. In fact, for the defending champion, the opponents they valued most were nothing more than two. Last year's runner-up Zenit and a team from China. After all, the advantage of the Chinese team in the World Cup has always been too obvious. In the past 5 years, they have generally won at least 3 championships, and they can win 4 or 5 championships when they are arrogant. Such a winning rate is enough to make the Chinese league the world's #1 league. Since FIFA came out of the Chinese league and achieved such a brilliant record in one breath, they are definitely not an easy opponent to deal with. In fact, there is no need to worry about them. Last year, Zheng was also so arrogant, but we still hit them hard. After thinking about it, Hodson said happily. They were careless last year. Will they be the same this year? Wilson looked at his good partner speechlessly. Didn't we change the team? This is a new team. Of course, it is possible to make such mistakes. Hodson said speciously. Wilson shook his head. Okay, what you said makes sense. It makes sense, doesn't it? Look, they tried so hard in the first game, obviously lacking experience. Who doesn't know that it's enough to qualify in the group stage? They played so arrogantly, and their state will definitely fluctuate in the future. When they meet us, we will take advantage of these places and beat them. Don't be too easy. Hodson continued. Wilson really had to nod his head now, because what Hodson said really made sense. Let's play our own game well first. The guys in Zenit should be the ones who are having a headache in the group now. Wilson said. Well, let them fight in the last game. Those guys in Zenit are also difficult to deal with. If we pay too much attention to this new Chinese team, we may suffer from Zenit. Hodson said. Wilson continued to nod his head. He began to find that his partner, who seemed a little out of tune at ordinary times, was actually so correct today. We are lucky in this grouping. This will be a good opportunity for us to defend the World Cup. It has been a long time since a team has been able to defend the World Cup. Even the Chinese team has not been able to do this for several years. If we can do it, we can create an era that belongs to us. We are lucky in the draw now, and we must work hard to do this. Wilson said to Hodson, and also to himself. Don't worry, it's no problem. Hodson answered confidently. Chapter 914 Zenit's Hope 13 To defeat the opponent in the first battle, the extraordinary performance is indeed way. Life can't take care of themselves. If they encounter extraordinary things, maybe they may be so miserable in the end, and they will really lose face. Even if they are better than them, such as the riverbed that they will face next, they will start to be serious. They will not want to lose too much. In the first round, Melbourne Lightspeed lost to Fifan, while River Plate lost to Zenit. Although River Plate is not weak, they are still a little worse than top teams like Zenit. At the high-end level, they may not be inferior to Zenit, but overall, they are worse than Zenit. So they still couldn't withstand the opponent's fierce attack in the entanglement, and finally lost by 2 goals. For River Plate, being in such a group, since they have already lost to a strong opponent, they can only qualify if they defeat the next strong opponent. After all, Melbourne Lightspeed is obviously a weak team. If River Plate can beat Fifan, then they will most likely qualify from the group if they beat Melbourne Lightspeed in the last round, and suppress Fifan in the group stage. Unless Fifan beats Zenit after losing to them, it is possible to form a cycle and prevent them from qualifying. However, such a complicated situation actually rarely occurs. So for River Plate, they will definitely fight hard in the second group game. If they don't fight, there will be no chance of qualifying. They are not Melbourne Lightspeed, used to losing 3 games in the World Cup and then going home. You know, River Plate is also a strong team that often enters the semi-finals and has won the World Cup. How can they tolerate that they can't even qualify for the group stage? However, the extraordinary performance is inevitably not good enough in the eyes of strong teams like Zenit and Nix. A real strong team will win 1 or 2 games without bloodshed like them, and then adjust their state and use the best state to meet the next more important games, so that they can increase their chances of winning the World Cup. Wilson and Hodgson, the 2 leaders of Nix, think so, and Zenit's 3 giants Petrovic, Sergei and Agata also think so. After all, a strong team, playing against the weakest opponent in the group stage, is so aggressive, but it seems guilty. In other words, they are not experienced enough, so they have exhausted all their strength in the game, which will definitely affect their performance in the future. The so-called spent force, this truth is not only understood by Chinese people, but also by foreigners. Fifan's performance seems a bit unfounded. Even if they are very good in the group stage, they will easily run into problems in the knockout stage. Zenit's Big 3 even hit some debate about this. After all, after defeating River Plate, Zenit's qualification can be said to be stable. They only need to defeat Melbourne Lightspeed, which is always at the bottom of the World Cup, to win 2 consecutive victories and basically qualify from the group stage in advance. In this case, do they still need to fight Fifan in the last round? They can take a good rest, and then qualify as the second place, and face the next knockout game in the best condition. After all, in the knockout stage, every opponent will be very strong. In this case, taking a few more days to rest can perform better, which is better than anything else. At least Sergei, who is known for his calmness in the Zenit team, thinks so. However, Petrovic disagrees. After taking a sip of vodka, the bear-like guy roared, "We can't give in to the Chinese team. They are excellent, but we have to beat them. We haven't won the World Cup for a long time, because the Chinese team is too strong. Now we have to beat this inexperienced team and prove to everyone that we can win the World Cup. It is precisely because we want to win the World Cup that we have to be calm," Sergei said with an unchanged expression. He doesn't drink, and is one of the few invisible Russians, so he always thinks he is calmer than Petrovic. "Okay, stop arguing, both of you," Agata said, and then both the calm Sergei and the roaring Petrovic quieted down and looked at the petite Agata. "That's right, the remaining one of the Zenit Big 3 is a woman. Neither of you two is right or wrong, you just have different perspectives," Agata said, "but this time, I want to support Petrovic." Petrovic waved his fist. "Yeah. Why? Is there something I didn't consider?" Sergei thought for a moment and asked curiously. "If it were normal times, your statement would be correct, but it's different in this World Cup. Fifan is going to challenge the 5-time champion, so we must first encircle and suppress them, so that we can increase our chances of winning," Agata said. "Please continue," Sergei said. "If we lose that game, we will fight with the Knicks in advance. Even if we win the Knicks, we will face the Fifan who can win more easily. They will face the second place in another group, which should be Liverpool. Liverpool's level is very good, but compared with us and the Knicks, it is still a little bit worse. They are more likely to win, especially in the group stage, when we did not cause them much trouble. They also got a rare rest time. If we try hard to beat them, then they will face the Knicks in not so good condition, and then the game will be a bloody battle, while we will face Liverpool, which is relatively easier to deal with. At the time, whether it is the Knicks or Fifan who appear in front of us, our probability of winning will become greater," Agata said. "So that's it, it makes sense. We can't let Fifan go so easily. Beating them to the second place in the group will be our best chance to win the championship. If we try our best in that game and still can't beat them, then it will be very dangerous for us to meet the Knicks in the knockout stage," Sergei said thoughtfully. "If we can't beat Fifan, then we are not qualified to challenge the championship." Petrovic shouted. "Yes, that's the truth." Agata nodded. "Ivan's fighting instinct is very sensitive." Petrovic laughed. Sergei shook his head helplessly. "Maybe this is the reason. His thinking is more delicate. He likes to think more about everything. Compared with Petrovic, he seems to be less direct. However, this is determined by the character of the person. In many cases, his calmness can still play a huge role. Okay, take a good rest next. In the next round of the game, we will take turns to play and keep our spirits up. When we play against Fifan in the last round, we may have to play more time on the court. It will be very tiring at the time. We can't consume too much energy now. Agatha said at last. I'm fine, but I don't know if Boris can stand it. After all, he always thinks too much, which makes him lack energy. Ha ha ha. Petronovich laughed. Sergei nodded seriously. You're right, my way is really too energy consuming. It is better for you to stay on the court longer without thinking about anything. Well, what are you talking about? What, are you mocking me for being brainless? Petronovich roared. Hey, you actually heard it. Your intelligence has increased significantly recently. Sergei said in surprise. Seeing the two people start to quarrel, Agatha shook her head helplessly, but she was not worried that the two people would do anything to hurt the relationship. The relationship between them was very good, or in other words, the three giants of Zenit were a whole. Their ages were not much different. Petronovich was the oldest, 27 years old this year, and Sergei was 2 years younger than him. They were all brought up by the previous captain. Although Sergei was younger, he was able to command the whole team better. So after the previous captain retired, Sergei became the captain of Zenit. Petronovich would occasionally complain a few words about this, and then take advantage of Sergei verbally, but he would not really do anything that was detrimental to the whole team. Agatha is even younger. She is only 21 years old this year and has only been a main player in Zenit for 3 years. However, since last year, she has become the de facto captain and tactical planner of Zenit. Her plan is something that the whole team must implement. Petronovich and Sergei are willing to help her and escort her. Of course, it is not because these two guys have any ideas about this new girl, but they know that Agatha is better than them and much younger. In the next 10 years, she will be the most critical player of Zenit. At the same time, she is also that key factor for Zenit to win the World Cup. So they have to protect her well. What's more, Agatha's views and attitudes have always been so correct. Under her command, Zenit is now invincible in Russia and has been smooth sailing in the Eastern European region. Although Zenit's previous results were also very good, they were not as good as this. She is Zenit's hope. Chapter 915. Overall, how is the level of River Plate? Zheng Qi asked Zhu Shan. After winning the first game, Fifan will prepare for the second game. Very good. The players in their team are generally at the middle level of our league, and the level of several of them is close to the god-level players. Zhu Shan replied. So powerful. Why didn't you say it earlier? Zheng Qi said. Concentrate on preparing to deal with the two biggest opponents. For opponents like River Plate, we just need to seize the time to review for 2 days. Zhu Shan replied indifferently. He is very confident now. Fifan's overall level is indeed very good now. Not only will the overall performance of the 4 core players be very good, but in fact, the experience and level of the substitutes who were the biggest shortcomings of Fifan before are also gradually improving. Although they cannot improve very much due to their talents, they have been able to play their attribute advantages better and better. This can be seen from their radar points. If we use a less scientific calculation method, the players in the top leagues can achieve the best level of their operation when their speed is increased to 100 points. The players in the first-class league can generally increase their speed to between 80 and 90 points. The extraordinary substitutes were at about the same level before. In terms of operation and real level, they are worthy at their origin, that is, the level of first-class players. Compared with the players in the top league, there is still a big gap. And now, in the past 2 seasons, they are actually increasing little by little. If the extraordinary substitutes' speed points were around 80 before, then now, their speed points have exceeded 90. Although they have not reached 100, they are already infinitely close. This means that their level is infinitely close to that of ordinary players in the Super League. With their attribute point advantages, they can even perform better than ordinary players in the Super League. This is terrible. Any substitute has such a level, plus their main and core players are even better. It is not a matter of luck that the extraordinary can get a record number of points. But their strength is indeed reached this point. And this is very important for them to participate in the World Cup. Because the teams participating in the World Cup, in fact, even if they are not as good as Zheng Qi, they are very close to Zheng Qi as a whole. It is still difficult to produce a few top players, but ordinary top league players are not rare. The champions of the major leagues that can enter the World Cup must have a very strong overall lineup. Each player has a level that exceeds the average level of the top league players in their country. That can be said to be standard. Fifan often suffered in this regard before, but now, they will not suffer any losses in this regard. They suffer less, which means that core players such as Zheng Qi can better devote themselves to the game and play their own characteristics. The last round of overwhelming victory has a lot to do with this. In fact, the two core players of Zheng Qi and Tin He have already seen this in the first game. It wasn't obvious in the league, but now it seems that they are improving so fast. No wonder they didn't make any mistakes or collapse despite our fierce pursuit. Li Cheng's, who had just won the league runner-up with a record number of points, said helplessly. "See? It's not me who lost, it's our entire team." Lu Xiaoshan turned to Wen Xiang and said, "Do you hope they can win the 5 championships?" Wen Xiang asked with a smile. "To be honest, I still hope they can win the 5 championships, otherwise, I will lose face." Lu Xiaoshan laughed. "That's fine, let's watch it with peace of mind. If they fail, we can call them and scold them." Wen Xiang said. "Wife, you're right." Fifan and his team certainly didn't know that Lu Xiaoshan and Wen Xiang had such a dirty idea. Now their attention has been focused on the second game. The opponent is the South American champion River Plate. South America is also a region with fierce competition. Unlike North America, which has always been dominated by American clubs, there are 3 countries in South America that are eligible to compete for the championship. Brazil and Argentina are mortal enemies. Uruguay's performance is worse than theirs, but it can often surprise people. Teams that emerge from such competition often have strong tenacity. In the first round of the game, although they lost to Zenit, it was a rather unfair loss. At least on the field, they did not fall behind. River Plate does not have a particularly outstanding top player, but they have more than 10 outstanding players at the second level, and the strength of the remaining substitutes is not bad. They can beat the various domestic and South American giants to qualify for the World Cup this year, relying on their strong overall strength. There is no player in their team who can be ranked with the God-level players, but there are more than 10 so-called quasi-God-level players. Whether it is the domestic opponent Boca Juniors with strong players, or the Brazilian champion Internacional, which also has 1 or 2 God-level players, they were all beaten up by their group of second-level quasi-God-level players and died miserably. However, Fifan is not afraid of this kind of team. There is a reason why Zhu Shan is so relaxed. Because the opponent has so many first-level players, they can beat up 1 or 2 God-level players, which is naturally a big advantage. They can take advantage of the number of players and target the opponent's God-level players from beginning to end. A team with God-level players is of course centered on God-level players. Once they are targeted, they will be much worse in performance. However, Fifan is not afraid of this. They have not 1 or 2 God-level players, but 4. The other main players of Fifan are not bad either. If the opponent really wants to target them, they can target them in return and make them unable to perform well. If their own strength is sufficient, then of course they will not worry about any problems in the next game. Fifan now has such confidence. Of course, in addition to confidence, they also have to treat the next game well. It is said that they should underestimate the opponent in strategy and pay attention to the opponent in tactics, so that they can be invincible. Fifan not only has to win the second game, but also have another big victory. Continuously creating pressure on all opponents is the overall strategy of Fifan. This overall strategy is not complicated, and everyone can think of it, but it is based on overall strength. Without an overwhelming advantage in strength, it is impossible to use this tactic. For example, in the first round, Fifan beat Melbourne Lightspeed to the point where it could not take care of itself. The 2 strongest teams, Zenit and Nix, did not feel anything terrible, but rather a little funny. In their view, dealing with a weak team like Melbourne Lightspeed, no matter how arrogant they are, is just a joke. But River Plate is different. River Plate is a qualifying team in South America, and a frequent visitor to the semi-finals and finals in the World Cup. It has also won the World Cup championship twice. Such a team is a standard strong team. If such a team is beaten by Fifan by a large score, Nix and Zenit's contempt will immediately turn into attention. Because it is difficult for them to confidently say that they can also beat River Plate by a large score, in this way, they can create more pressure on the 2 biggest opponents. But to do this, they have to score a large score in this game. It is not difficult to beat River Plate, but it is indeed very difficult to beat River Plate by a large score. However, no matter how difficult the task is, Fifan will do it. Because they want to create a miracle, an unprecedented miracle. They want to reduce the possibility of accidents as much as possible, so they will treat the whole game as a game. The first game is to establish prestige. The next game is to use the prestige established in advance to make the next game easier. All games are not independent, but are linked together. Of course, it is not easy to beat River Plate with a big score. It is not enough to have a big enough score. After all, it is almost impossible to achieve a shocking big score. Fifen can beat Melbourne by double digits at the speed of light, but beat River Plate by double digits. That is too much of an underestimation of the South American champion, so the key to this game is not to win a few goals. Of course, winning is necessary, but how to form a huge advantage on the field is the key. If we play with suppression, we have to look at the few others, especially Brother Fei. His style of play is the most imposing and the easiest to hit in the face. Zheng Qi laughed. Leave it to me, I will continue to break through them head on. Fei nodded. To form a huge advantage on the field, there is no faster means than repeatedly breaking through the front. If you can continuously break through the opponent's defense line, the opponent will know that you want to break through the front and cannot resist. This will not only put a huge pressure on the opponent's confidence, but also bring huge pressure to other teams watching the game. Then our specific tactics for this game are like this: Fei attack the opponent's defense line head-on, and everyone else must support him. When Fei goes off the court to rest, the task of the frontal attack will be handed over to you. Zhu Shan said to Zheng Qi. No problem. Zheng Qi smiled and nodded. Zhu Shan was very relieved about this, and Fei was also relieved. He knew that Zheng Qi's level of frontal breakthrough would not be much worse than his own. Although he was a player of almost the same level as Zheng Qi before, now seeing that Zheng Qi has gradually suppressed him, Fei did not think there was anything wrong. He is a genius, and Zheng Qi is also. It is also normal for a genius to suppress a genius. Now they are teammates. The stronger the teammates, the easier it is to win. Chapter 916. What's there to be afraid of? When the second round of the game started, Chinese fans once again swarmed to the stands, ready to watch the game. The World Cup of Football era may not be the highest level of the world's games, but it is definitely the most watched game in the world. The number of Chinese fans is the highest in the world, so the attention of the Chinese league has always been the highest in the world. However, when it comes to the World Cup, they also have to pay attention to the World Cup. With the fans of other countries, the attention is of course higher than that of the Chinese league. 1 + 1 is definitely greater than 1, this is beyond doubt. Chinese fans are also very concerned about this game. In fact, almost every game in the World Cup in which the Chinese team participates will have more than 500 million Chinese fans paying attention. After all, there are now 1 billion players of football era in China. Is it possible that all players of football era do not pay attention to the World Cup? In the league, there may be many fans who only watch the excitement and will not become fans of certain clubs. However, in the World Cup, any Chinese player will become a fan of the Chinese participating team. Even if they don't come to watch it live, they will watch it through live broadcasts. Therefore, the number of fans on site and the number of fans watching the broadcast at the World Cup are not at the same level as those in ordinary leagues. The shouts of hundreds of millions of fans in the stands would be enough to prevent any player from playing properly if there were no quarantine. Even if there is quarantine, just looking at the crowds in the stands that cover the sky is enough to make any player's blood boil and unable to control themselves. If Fifen had not accumulated a lot of experience along the way, especially if they had seen similar big scenes in the East Asian Cup, their performance in the first round of the league would have been affected to a certain extent. In fact, their first half of the first round of the game was indeed affected, otherwise, with their level, they should have won more than 4 goals. This game was much better. When they came on the stage, Fifen's players began to greet the outside more and seemed very relaxed. In the first round, they all looked a little stiff when they came on the stage, but now it's different. Soldiers who have been baptized by battle are real warriors. Yuan Fei said happily. He was looking forward to seeing Fifen win the 5-time champion, and the relaxed performance of most of Fifen's substitutes also made him feel happy. After all, for extraordinary players, in such a situation, if they can treat the crazy fans in the stands more calmly, they will be able to perform better. Our opponent in this match is River Plate. They have already lost to Zenit before, so for River Plate, this match is also their life and death battle. They will definitely fight to the end with Fifen in this match. River Plate has a strong lineup, and the level of their players is very even, which allows them to maintain their performance at a very high level even if they are constantly rotating. In the first round, they were evenly matched with Zenit. If it weren't for the key performances of several core players of Zenit, they would not have lost the game. Fifen has to be careful in this match. Let's take a look at their starting lineup. The 4 core players are all on the court. It seems that Fifen plans to take the lead. Amid Yuan Fei shouting, the shouts of Fifen's fans became even more excited. In their opinion, Fifen's current approach is undoubtedly to start a massacre again in this match. You know, Fifen is generally more cautious in the league, and will not put all 4 core players on the court at the beginning. After all, in many cases, the opponent has at most 2 god-level players on the court, and they are simply bullying the opponent by putting 4 god-level players on the court. You have to know that the league is sometimes a big stage. Although every championship will make people fight for it without any mercy, in some ordinary games, you can't be too ruthless to the other side. It should be more entertaining and not too excessive. This is the right way. Only in some important games will they choose to let the 4 core players play together. There is an important honor. Doing so will not make people feel disgusted. This is also a kind of unspoken rule. In the World Cup, Fifen does not intend to give the other side any face. This is also normal. The World Cup is held once a year, and there are few participating teams. In many cases, 2 teams may meet once in more than 10 years. Of course, there is no such thing as giving or not giving face. Just play as many balls as you can. It's just that in many cases, in order to consider the long term, strong teams often consciously control their own state. Fifen doesn't care about this. What they want is to win all the way. If you really want to say that you're tired, you won't be tired. After all, 5 games in half a month are very stressful, but as long as the rotation is enough, you won't be particularly tired. Only Su Jing was worried about whether Zheng Qi could bear it, but she would not say it out loud. What the team needed at this time was stability, and she also believed that Zheng Qi would definitely allocate his energy reasonably under such circumstances. The players of River Plate looked at Fifen's lineup, and they were also a little speechless. Fortunately, our starting lineup is also all the main players. River Plate's captain Hesto muttered. It seems that this Chinese team wants to defeat us directly. We can't be defeated by them like this. Let's have a good fight with them. Another main player Amida waved his fist and shouted. The starting players of River Plate responded one after another. For them, Fifen's attitude of clearly wanting to kill them directly was unbearable. You're indeed very good. You have achieved such outstanding results in the Chinese league. We are probably unable to compete with you, but if you want to kill us immediately, you are thinking too much. We are not easy to deal with. A strong team like Zenit only entangled with us for the whole game. You Fifen are very powerful, but you want to defeat us in one breath. Isn't it too much? River Plate was still very confident. They were not rookies in the World Cup. In fact, they could participate in the World Cup every 2 or 3 years, and they could basically enter the semi-finals every time. It was not like these people had never played against a Chinese team before. Although the team 4 years ago was very stable and excellent, they lost the game without any temper, but they only lost 1 goal. At least 2/3 of the River Plate players had participated in the last World Cup game. They even felt that they had a chance to win that game, and they just lost that game because of bad luck. After all, they only lost 1 goal in the end. If they could play better in the last attack, they were fully capable of dragging the game into overtime. What they didn't know was that they actually had no chance in that game, although they were not at a disadvantage on the field. Because their opponent in that game was Team He led by Li Qing's. That game. We actually won that game very easily. We only won by 1 goal in the end because we only needed to win by 1 goal to qualify. Even if they tied the score and went into overtime, we had the ability to suddenly beat them. I had already started preparing for the final at the time. For that game, I kept several of you from playing. Do you still remember? Li Qing's asked his teammates with a smile. Yu Gang and others nodded. Their performance in the league that season was not good at all. In fact, it was because of Li Qing's request. In the league that year, Team He had no hope of winning the championship. Their attention was all on the World Cup. So Li Qing's played a big hand. From the beginning, he let Chengfen retain its strength. It was only ranked 3rd in the league and failed to win the championship in the cup competition, just to give the opponents in the World Cup an illusion. After all, it was also that first time that Team He participated in the World Cup. For those opponents, Team He was also a very unfamiliar opponent. Only Li Qing's could set up such a big game. In fact, that game was very successful. Team He played mediocrely in the World Cup that year, and it seemed that they would be eliminated at any time. However, their biggest opponent, the Lakers from the United States, won consecutive victories and looked arrogant. Especially after defeating Zenit and entering the World Cup finals, the Lakers believed that they had won the World Cup championship. They were defeated by Chengfen last year. Although they could not seek revenge on Chengfen this year, it was also a good opportunity to attack this Chinese team. The Lakers were indeed very strong that year. They were the champions of the World Cup before Zheng Qi won the championship. Although they were defeated by Zheng Qi led by Liu Xiaoxin that following year, after accumulating strength for a year, the Lakers believed that they could win even if they met Zheng Qi again. What's more, this team was suppressed by Zheng Qi in the league. So they were tragic. Li Qing's dug a pit and pitted Liu Xiaoxin more than once or twice, not to mention these arrogant guys in the Lakers. In the finals, Team Head played their most exciting game of the season. Li Qing's dispatch and the outstanding performance of Yu Gang and others made Li Qing's and his 5 Tigers truly famous. After losing in the finals, the powerful Lakers began to fall apart, and the domestic championships in the United States began to be won more by the Knicks. For this, almost all Lakers players and Lakers fans have a very deep impression. The River Plate did not have a very deep feeling, because they were not Lakers. With a bystander attitude, they did not feel how strong the level of performance of Team Head in that game was. Besides, wasn't the opponent in this game Team Head? What was there to be afraid of? Chapter 917. This is the effect we want. Is Fifan terrible? If you ask this question to the opponents of the Super League, after this year's competition, they will definitely answer unanimously. Terrible. It is indeed terrible. Just the 4 God-level players are terrible. They also have 8 or 9 main players whose level exceeds the average level of the Super League. The other substitutes are not as good, but their attributes are so strong. Such a strong team is unreasonable. After all, in the league, the points they got in this year's league are too much. Team Head also got more than 100 points, but still failed to win the championship. This makes people speechless. In the cup competition, they almost crushed all the way. After entering the knockout stage, they can be said to have defeated the 3 strongest teams in the league and won the cup championship. How can such a team not be terrible? However, the people of Riverbed think that Fifan is not terrible. It is just a team. Even if they get so many points, it does not mean that they have the strength to crush. Maybe the overall decline of the Chinese leagues this season. Didn't they say that their 2 strongest teams, Zheng Qi and Team Head, lost some main players this year? In a league full of weak teams, getting such a high score is nothing. Their naive idea was soon shattered in that confrontation. At the beginning of the game, the 2 sides soon met in the midfield. River Plate is not afraid of direct confrontation. On the contrary, because their average strength is not bad, they prefer this kind of direct confrontation. Their starting players are all quasi-God-level players, and they cooperate with each other very well. Although such a lineup is not flat in South America, it can give almost all opponents a headache. They have the ability to defeat all opponents in South America, so they are also very competitive in the World Cup. In the last game against Zenit, Zenit only kept entangled with them and seized 2 opportunities to score. Now in such a direct confrontation, are we afraid of you? With such confidence, the players of River Plate roared and sprinted. And this map is also very suitable for such a confrontation. There is an open space in the center of the field, which is just right for both sides to deploy their formations for a battle. As the champion of South America, River Plate certainly will not look amateur when attacking. The players who were confronting head-on, attacking from the flanks, supporting and protecting from the rear were all well organized and arranged in a very reasonable formation. Before they even came into contact, they instantly formed a reasonable attacking formation. The level of River Plate was already shown inadvertently. Individual movement speed is nothing. The overall formation together and being able to maintain high-speed movement is very impressive. This shows that this team not only has outstanding individuals, but also has a tacit understanding of their overall cooperation. The latter is even more important than the former. After all, the football era is a collective sport. Like classical football, there are 11 players on the field. No matter how good a single player is, how many can he play? Only overall strength is the kingly way. Top teams, strong overall strength plus several outstanding individuals. A secondary team like River Plate at least has a strong overall strength, which exerts the overall strength to the extreme and also has outstanding results and performance. However, after quickly forming an overall formation, the players of River Plate immediately found that the opponent also quickly formed an overall formation. The ability to integrate in a fast-moving environment means the overall level of a team. In this case, the ability shown can reflect the overall strength of the team. The conclusion drawn by the River Plate players after watching the Fifan game video shows that Fifan is a team with several very outstanding players and several outstanding players. Half of their players are close to or even better than the River Plate main players. But the remaining half are not even as good as the River Plate substitutes. In such a team, the player level of the entire team is pyramid-shaped. Such a configuration was very reasonable in the past professional games of classical football, and it can even be said to be the most powerful configuration. However, in the current environment where every player is very useful, it seems quite unreasonable. This means that the main players have to pay more, and the substitutes will not get more training opportunities. This can also be seen from FIFA's previous games. Although most of the games still took turns to play, there was no essential difference in the time of the main players and substitutes. However, in some important games, FIFA basically played those games as a main player, and the number and time of substitute appearances were very short. This is of course not good, because it is not an important game, and it cannot allow the players to really grow. It is just to let them accumulate some experience. In this case, their substitutes will never help at the critical moment. Of course, at this time, the FIFA players quickly set up their formations, which was also expected by the River Plate players. After all, FIFA will send all their main players at this time, and it is natural for the main lineup to perform like this. In this case, let's have a good fight with the FIFA main force. You are the main force, and we are also the main force, so we may not be afraid of you. Besides, even if we lose, our substitutes can be better than your substitutes. There is a game every 3 days. Can you still use the main force to play the whole game? That won't tire you out. With such emotions and confidence, the River Plate players launched a fierce attack without fear. They have 11 quasi-god level players on the field, so many times the game is easy. They have no center of gravity, but everyone on the field is the center of gravity. Such a team can change its offensive focus at any time and constantly cut into the weak points of the opponent's formation. However, the extraordinary tactics were even more arrogant and overbearing. Shinryu Fei rushed into their formation alone. The one who faced him head-on was Hesto from River Plate, who was also a very good frontal attack player. Seeing Shinryu Fei rushing up so ferociously, he immediately felt a little unhappy. Damn, no matter how good you were at fighting, you were courting death by rushing up alone. He immediately went up to meet him. Hesto didn't believe that his frontal attack ability would be much worse than Shinryu Fei's. Even if he would lose a little, he was not alone in the game, and his teammates behind him could intercept him at any time. At the time, Shinryu Fei alone would not be able to withstand the attack of all of them. So he took the lead to meet him. When he met him, he was still thinking about fighting twice, and then pretending to retreat, attracting Shinryu Fei, and then surrounding him with heavy troops, and directly sending Shinryu Fei out with concentrated fire. When fighting hand to hand, it is of course a very important thing to send one of the opponent's core players out of the field first. River Plate does not have a real core, so they are more advantageous in this situation. Any one of them can sacrifice, anyone can take over the core's job, and the opponent always has to take better care of the core. Others can die, but the core cannot die. In this way, the opponent's tactics seemed to be traceable. However, as soon as they made contact, Hesto began to fly back. His teammates who were familiar with him were all stunned. Shouldn't they fight 2 moves first? Why did they retreat so quickly? What they didn't know was that Hesto was in a bitter mood at the moment. Just in this contact, the two sides exchanged 3 skills at the same time. One of his skills missed, and 2 hit Shinryu Fei, but none of them hit the vital parts. And Shinryu Fei's 3 skills all hit him, 2 hit the vital parts. In this moment of fighting, Shinryu Fei's physical value may have dropped by less than 1/10, while his physical value dropped by nearly half. How can this be fought? Hesto had to retreat. As soon as he retreated, Shinryu Fei quickly followed up. This is exactly his style, he won't let go and he is right. Of course, the River Plate teammates would not sit idly by and watch Shinryu Fei chase Hesto. At this time, Shinryu Fei rushed in, which was actually equivalent to going deep into the enemy camp. It was a good opportunity to surround him. 2 River Plate players on both wings attacked at the same time, trying to intercept Shinryu Fei. Even if they couldn't kill him, they had to stop him from continuing to attack. At the same time, a River Plate player surrounded Shinryu Fei from behind, trying to surround him directly, so that others could stop FIFA's other players first. The 4 of them worked together to kill Shinryu Fei, the offensive spearhead. Any game must pay attention to momentum. It can be said that it is very important to take the lead at the beginning. If they can solve the opponent's offensive spearhead, then there is no doubt that they can take some advantages. At this time, FIFA launched the attack. They can resist FIFA's first attack and also take the lead in the whole game. The next moment, the River Plate player who cut off Shinryu Fei's retreat was stopped by Lieshbo. As for the River Plate players who rushed over from the 2 wings, 2 figures quickly appeared in front of them. The fastest wings of Fifan, Liga Rui and Wang Yanfan, blocked them at the same time. Obviously, Fifan had already noticed their thoughts in advance, so he intercepted them before they formed a siege and before others completed the interception. In this way, Hester was in trouble. He had already stopped his escape and was ready to encircle Shinryu Fei with his teammates, but in the blink of an eye, the situation instantly turned into him facing Shinryu Fei alone again. Shinryu Fei's attacks came one after another. Hester, who had lost his courage, could only retreat again. After retreating a few steps, Shinryu Fei finally stopped attacking. Hester breathed a sigh of relief, but the next moment he knew what a big mistake he had made. He retreated too fast and too far all the way, so that he retreated outside the overall formation. And his retreat exposed Miguel, the auxiliary corps who was originally under protection. This is the effect that Fifan wanted. Shinryu Fei did not continue to chase Hester because he had turned his attention to the opponent's corps Miguel. Chapter 918. Because he deserves. Miguel was struggling to hold on. In fact, he should be able to hold on, because although Shinryu Fei's attack was very fierce, his operation level was also good. At least he could protect himself temporarily. This was the standard heartland of the River Plate's overall formation. Although a lot of people were deployed to the front to outflanking, so that it seemed a little weak, but the others were not fools. They would come to support quickly after reacting. He just needed to hold on for a while. Shinryu Fei's attack was indeed very fierce, but it was also very difficult to take him away in such a short time. Miguel's thinking stopped at this moment. The next moment, his whole body was filled with white light, and then he returned to the bench. Damn, how did I die? Miguel couldn't help but shout like he collapsed. It's normal to die on the court, but it's not normal to die without knowing how you died. At least Miguel didn't expect how he died. The captain of Fifan suddenly appeared behind you, and then suddenly shot, and you died. The teammate replied helplessly. How is it possible? Miguel was a little incredible. Jink, the teammate replied. Miguel suddenly realized. Jink's skills are superimposed, with invisibility and the ultimate move of Assassinate Zheng Qi. It is normal to take him away like this. But can Zheng Qi, who was trapped in the siege, still escape? Zheng Qi really can't escape, but he still persisted in the siege for 3 seconds, giving Shinryu Fei room to escape. The other players of Fifan began to attack frantically, exchanging injuries for injuries. The next thing is very simple. One side has support and the other side doesn't. Then the side with support knows how to play even if it is stupid. The formation of the riverbed collapsed quickly. Originally, their overall strength was a little worse, and now there is no support. The opponent's large-scale skills and one-on-one tough confrontation are not what they can resist at all. Of course, they will collapse at the touch of a button. They began to retreat continuously, trying to gradually stabilize the front line. However, they were chased by the Fifan players and collapsed all the way to their own goal. At this time, Miguel had returned to the court, but it was useless. They have been suppressed in front of their own goal. With extraordinary level, they can easily score a goal. In fact, it is true. After less than 2 minutes of siege, Fifan scored a goal. 1-0. Everyone was actually prepared for this result. With extraordinary level, it is very easy to score the first goal. Especially when they seized the initiative at the beginning and suppressed the opponent. They are really fierce, but if we really talk about their real level, they are only a little higher than us. If we rotate next, we still have an advantage. Although he was targeted and suffered a lot just now, Miguel still maintained the calmness of a supporting player. He said to other teammates. Amida Pasquier and others nodded one after another, only Hester had a stern face. He just lost face. Don't care about one performance, the overall performance is the key. Next, we will just use the main force in the first half. Hester, calm down. Miguel said to Hester. Hester nodded. Although he was a little unhappy, he also knew that Miguel's words were correct. What if they don't rotate? Pasquier asked a question. Then we will try to tangle with them and consume their physical energy. Fifan is aiming for the 5-time champion this year. If they really dare to let their main players play the whole game against us, we will definitely not win, but we can also drag them down and not hold on for too long. Miguel said with gritted teeth. Wouldn't that be a pioneer for those guys in Europe and North America? Amida said unhappily. That can't be helped. No team has ever won the 5-time champion. If the team in North America or Europe has the chance, we will do the same. This is related to our face. Miguel said. In this case, what we have to do is to encircle Fifan. If they want to humiliate us with all the main players, they can. but we will also make their main players exhausted. Okay, let's do it. Few Argentine players have that kind of fragile temper. Instead, they are all guys with hot tempers. This is the innate temperament brought on the Pampas grassland, although the Pampas grassland can't stay now. After Miguel's analysis, the River Plate players waved their fists and began to prepare for the next game. After the normal rotation, River Plate had almost half of its main players on the field, and the rest were all at the top level in their league. You should know that although there are not many players of the God-level players, China has only about 30, and other powerful countries generally have only 10 to 20. Only superpowers such as the United States and Russia can have more than 20, but there is no shortage of players at the level of the General Super League. The players who can gain a foothold in the top league are basically of good level. As the top team in Argentina, River Plate is certainly not bad overall. Except for the lack of God-level players, their configuration is not bad compared to any strong team in that Chinese Super League. After all, the South American division is not a weaker division like the Australian division. Although there are fewer countries, there are also strong teams. When the two sides met again in the midfield, the players of River Plate breathed a sigh of relief. Obviously, Fifen did not want to rely on the main force to directly kill River Plate. This tactic is also very desperate and cannot be used under normal circumstances. Fifen is obviously not so crazy, and they still have to play the knockout round. So, it was only Liu Xibo and Zheng Qi who led half of the main players and half of the substitutes who were good at defense who appeared on the field. It was a typical rotation method. In this case, the players of River Plate felt that they did not need to be too polite. In the confrontation between the main players, we were indeed at a disadvantage, but with half of the main players and half of the substitutes, we should have some advantages. And this time we were the attackers, and the attacking side would naturally have an advantage. They quickly launched an attack. The Fifen players laid out their lines and began to defend steadily. Under the command of Liu Xibo, Fifen's defense was very solid, but the River Plate was not very worried. The opponent always had 5 substitutes, and these 5 substitutes were all places that could be used. Their strength was indeed a little worse, so attacking their defensive positions would always have a good effect. In the games that Fifen had participated in, the opponents of Fifen would always attack the positions where the substitutes stood in Fifen's defense. Although the core and main players of Fifen paid attention to this problem, they would always be used by the opponent to tear open the defense line. This shows that this is Fifen's chronic disease, a problem that can never be changed. If there is a flaw in the opponent's lineup that cannot be changed, then of course we have to pursue this flaw relentlessly. This is what a wise team should do. River Plate is of course very wise, and they also know what to do. So they used the same series of attacks and dispatches to disperse the defensive focus of Fifen, and then began to launch a fierce attack on opposition. The one guarding there is Zheng Qi. From the information, this is a grassroots player. He is not even a youth training player of any professional club. He just joined Fifen very early and then followed Fifen all the way up. It can be seen that he is very hard-working, but in fact his level is still a long way from the top league. Even compared with the best players in the first-class league, he seems to be a little worse. There seems to be only one reason for being able to play a first-team positioning for Fifen, that is, because he is old, he has no merits but hard work, so he can continue to play a first-team positioning for Fifen. A more heartbreaking statement is that Fifen itself is good at defense, and they only think about how to make up for the shortcomings in defense. As for defense, Liu Xibo is enough, and it doesn't matter if the others are almost there. But what is the reality? Zheng Qi is not very noticeable in Fifen, but like Filady, he is a player respected by others. Whether it is Chen Lin who comes from a wealthy family, Lin Fei and Zheng Qi who are youth players in the Super League, or Zheng Qi who also comes from a relatively poor background, they all admire these two people. Among them, Zheng Qi is especially admired. Because even in Fifen, a team with many grassroots players, no one is more grassroots than Zheng Qi. The other main players and substitutes are at least youth players of Class A. Clubs such as Cancun. Being able to become professional players proves that they have extremely good strength compared to ordinary players. Although Shen Ruofei, Ban Yuanfen, Li Derui, Zheng Qi, Niao and Zheng Hai are also grassroots players, their talents show that they have not become professional youth players. It's just that they didn't take this path before. Only Zheng Qi is not a professional youth player, nor is he a very talented person. He is not young anymore. In the whole team, he is only a little younger than Bin Shikai and Fulei. No matter how you look at it, he doesn't have much future. But only Fifen knows that no one works harder than him in hard training and trying to understand other opponents. This is the key to why he can always gain a foothold in FIFA's first team. It's not because he is old, but because he deserves it. He deserves the level of FIFA's first team. Only FIFA knows this, and others don't know. Riverbed certainly doesn't know, so they found the best breakthrough point and launched a fierce attack. As long as they kill, or repel this opponent, they can directly cut into FIFA's lineup, and then break through the opponent's defense line. Once the defense line is torn open, it will be easy to deal with next. At that moment, Zhuya was facing the siege of at least 3 Riverbed players. And they were all the main players of Riverbed. Chapter 919. Can't retreat, can't die. In the fierce overall confrontation, it is not easy to find such a gap. Constantly attacking, dispatching, attracting the opponent's attention, and then pulling the opponent's formation apart, it is not difficult to do this. Any defense line will always have places that cannot be taken care of. In this case, the defense line will always make someone appear isolated and helpless at that moment. After all, defense is passive, and offense is active. However, such flaws are often fleeting. After all, the position of the confrontation between the two sides is often only so large. With the speed of the player's movement, it is normal to quickly go back and forth to fill in the position and assist in defense. It is indeed difficult to seize such a gap. River Plate is indeed a strong team. They quickly seized such a flaw. When Zhuya was guarding there alone, they launched an attack. When FIFA mixed defense, Zhuya and other substitutes often stood still to output, while other outstanding players ran back and forth to protect the defense line. The advantage of this approach is that it can better play the advantages of the substitute's attributes, and the disadvantage is that the movement is relatively rigid and it is easy for the opponent to seize the opportunity. This is it now. When the Riverbed launched a fierce attack on Zhuya, it would take at least 1 to 2 seconds for others to respond. In a head-on confrontation, such a time may seem insignificant, but it is enough to make a player fall. The 3 players of the Riverbed this time were also very good. Among them, Amida was an offensive quasi-god level player. With 2 powerful main players, their attack was difficult for even a quasi-god level player to escape unscathed. Moreover, even if they could not kill the opponent, as long as Zhuya retreated, there would be a gap in the extraordinary defense line that could not be filled temporarily. Amida did not believe that Zhuya could continue to stand here. However, Zhuya judged the situation at the moment in time. He could not retreat. Once he retreated, even if he would not die, his defense line would be cut in 2 by the opponent. At the time, only one teammate on one side could get the recovery skills of the auxiliary core, and the teammates on the other side would be isolated and helpless. This is the disadvantage of the front line being cut. So the steps that were about to waver continued to be firm. Zhuya did not retreat a single step. He stood there stubbornly, and continued to hold that position. He dodged the opponent's skills if he could, and fought with his skills if he could. If he couldn't dodge or fight, he would use his body to bear it. The advantage of taking the initiative to bear it is that the position hit by the opponent's skills is often not a vital part. With his own physical fitness, he can bear it for a longer time. 3 seconds passed in the blink of an eye. Zhuya's physical fitness value has fallen to the bottom. If he is hit a few more times, he will turn into light and leave the field. But he still didn't retreat. Zheng Qi had arrived at this time. In fact, he could come to support half a second earlier, but he could see at a glance that Zhuya could still bear it. This is a player whose level is not very outstanding, but his psychological quality is excellent. At the same time, his judgment is also very accurate, which is the experience he has accumulated from watching various games. Such a rich experience accumulation allows him to fully make up for his shortcomings in operation. At the critical moment, the choice he makes can reflect the value of his attribute points on the field. That's enough. It can even be said that this is a miracle. You should know that Zhuya's current attribute points are also over 800 points. This is the attribute point that only god level players can have. He can fully play the role of these attribute points on the field. Even if there is no operational advantage, it also allows him to play a role on the field, far exceeding an ordinary top league player, and even close to a quasi-god level player. Since he is carrying it, there is no need to worry. In this half second, he did one thing. He used a skill that is more complicated to operate. This skill is more powerful, but it takes half a second to be completely still when operating it. This requirement makes this skill almost impossible to operate in the game, but Zheng Qi likes to use it very much. He always brings this skill. Because he knows that with his style, there will be a lot of such time. For example, now. Half a second later, the three River Plate attackers found that their bodies began to become immobile. Stiff state, and it is a stiff state that lasts for 2 seconds. In the game, no matter how strong the impact is, it will often only make the player stiff for less than half a second, or even a quarter of a second, and this full 2 seconds of stiff time is enough for many people to do many things. In fact, it is also true. 2 seconds later, 3 of River Plate's attackers, including Amida, a quasi-god level player, turned into light and left the field at the same time. And Fifin did not die. Including Zheng Qi. When Zheng Qi attacked, Su Jing's healing skills had already landed on Zheng Qi. He quickly recovered his vigorous state. 10 against 7, this is a big advantage. Although River Plate's auxiliary core is still there, the advantage in numbers makes it difficult for them to resist Fifin's fierce attack. What's more, they have also died at 3 quasi-god level players with so many substitutes. They only have 6 quasi-god level players on the field, and now half of them have died at once. Even if they are not too dependent on a certain person, it is difficult to play without half of the core. They are still the attacking side. The attacking side can launch attacks from all angles unscrupulously, but there are also disadvantages. They have to protect the football well. When they have an advantage in numbers, they can show their level well and protect the football well, but once they're at a disadvantage in numbers, it will be very fatal. If they want to protect the football, the number of people available for offensive and defensive will become even smaller. The key is that once they're outnumbered, it will be easy to tell where the ball is. Fifin began a fierce siege. River Plate wanted to try their best to control the ball and protect it, waiting for the moment when the players came back to support, but Fifin did not give them such an opportunity. Zheng Qi's continuous large-scale skills forced them to expose the location of the ball. To avoid the coverage of skills, the ball had to be kept moving. Once it moved, the Fifin players would be able to see the clues. After noticing where the ball was, Fifin started to attack again. Zheng Qi took several substitutes to attack the place where the ball was, and finally they successfully hit the ball with their skills, causing the ball to refresh. The River Plate players could only start to retrieve continuously. The probability of the ball appearing in Fifin's half is much greater. This is actually the case. After finding the refreshed football, Fifin began to launch a fierce attack, and then they suppressed the River Plate's defenses step by step, and pressed the River Plate at their own goal step by step, and then successfully scored a goal. In this process, Fifin did show their top level, constantly pressing the River Plate's defenser, step by step to gain an advantage, and then expanded the score to 2-0. However, when Fifin scored, all the applause was given to Zheng Qi. This substitute, who was not very present even in the Fifin team, played the most critical role in the process of scoring at such a critical moment. Everyone can see how dangerous Fifin's situation was when the 3 main attackers of the River Plate launched a fierce attack on Zheng Qi. At the time, Zheng Qi only needed to take a step back, and Fifin's entire formation would be cut into 2 sections. Then there was no way to make up for the disadvantage. What awaited them was to be constantly suppressed and compressed to the front of the goal, and finally lost the ball. This process can be simulated by any fan who is familiar with the football era game. But at the time, he did not take a step back, which was very valuable. Not only did he not retreat, but he also withstood the attack of 3 opponents and did not die. This is the most admirable thing. It is too difficult to not retreat and not die. He relied on his courage and experience, as well as his strong physical fitness, to the last moment, and then this goal came. If it weren't for him, the score should be 1-1, a draw. But his performance made the score 2-0, leading by 2 goals. This back and forth is the difference of 2 goals. In many games, the difference of 2 goals can form the final victory. This is certainly an amazing achievement. Well done. Zheng Qi reached out to Zheng Qi. Zheng Qi high-fived him and then calmly left the court. Now it's time to start rotating. Although it's still defenser, except for Liu Shibo who is still on the court, everyone else has to rotate and rest. There was warm applause in the stands. Even if this attack and defenser can only be regarded as a small episode in the whole game, it will still make countless fans happy and excited. Because the entire game is made up of countless such episodes. Some of these episodes are dull, some are wonderful. They are combined together to form an irreversible vortex, forming a symphony that shakes the world. And the episode that Zheng Qi just played is undoubtedly wonderful. A wonderful episode deserves loud enough applause. It's really wonderful. Lady, who also sat on the bench, said to Zheng Qi sincerely. The 2 of them have similar characteristics, are in similar positions, and are about the same age, so they can get along well. If you were in my place, you could do it too. At the time, I just thought about not retreating and not dying. Zhuya replied calmly. It's easy to say, but it's hard to do it. Fu Lei laughed. But if I have such an opportunity, I will also try to do so. Of course. Zhuya also laughed. Si est escuchando esta novela en un canal distinto al mundo fanfic novelas, significat lo descarga and y subir en cines fuerzos invitamos cordialmente a visitar nuestro canal. Mundo fanfic novelas all encontrar la versión original de esta historia y podrás explorar muchas otras novelas de diversos narradores. Te esperamos para sumergirte en un mundo de novelas increíbles. Chapter 920. Unscientific for River Plate. Falling behind by 2 goals after 10 minutes of the game was undoubtedly a huge blow to them. They were thinking about having a good fight with Fifan in this game, preferably defeating Fifan, and then qualifying together with Zenit, but they lost 2 goals right at the start. In terms of the frequency of the game, they lost the ball faster than the light speed of Melbourne before. This is really unacceptable. Moreover, when the main force played against the main force, they were at a disadvantage, which was something they could think of. However, when everyone was half of the main force, they still fell at a disadvantage. It was obviously their attack, but the opponent grabbed the ball, and then suppressed them to score a goal, which was even more unacceptable. Doesn't this mean that in addition to the main force not being Fifan's opponent, even the substitutes, they are not Fifan's opponent? In this case, how can this game be played? The main force itself is not as good as the opponent, and they are mentally prepared. Their hope of victory is to be able to gain the upper hand when the substitutes compete against them, but now the substitutes have no upper hand against them, and are even at a disadvantage, so there is no chance of winning. But it shouldn't be like this. In many of the games we watched, the opponents attacked Fifan's substitutes and scored goals. River Plate was thinking very depressed. They couldn't figure it out. Actually, there was nothing to figure out. Fifan really lost the ball in those games, but on the one hand, their substitutes had not really grown up in many cases, and on the other hand, the opponents they faced were also very strong opponents. They all had at least one God-level player. With the God-level player as the core to break through the position guarded by one of Fifan's substitutes, it would certainly be able to achieve better results. In the final analysis, the same tactics, the previous opponents of Fifan were able to succeed mainly because their opponents were too outstanding. But River Plate was not so outstanding. Maybe overall, they were better than some of the opponents that Fifan encountered, but they lacked a truly outstanding core. Relying on the Wolfpack tactics or the group fight tactics, they have defeated many teams with God-level players, but in this case, without the God-level players, it is still a little different. Without such an offensive core, they could not concentrate their forces to launch a fierce attack towards a certain position, so as to quickly tear open the opponent's defense line. So next, if they want to attack, they can only attack normally and honestly, step by step, take advantage of the flexibility of the ball under their feet, gradually compress the opponent's defense space, and then score a goal with difficulty. However, River Plate did not think of this quickly. They just felt that the attack just now was not sharp enough and not perfect enough. They decided to try again. Come on, let's attack like that again, and we must tear open their defense line. Do you understand? Miguel shouted. Got it. The players of River Plate answered in unison. At this time, their morale was still very strong. Although they were already behind by 2 goals, the game had only passed 10 minutes. There was still a long time for them to make up the score. Are they discouraged now? Maybe those ordinary teams would do this, but they, a strong team that has gone through countless games to stand on the World Cup field, will not easily admit defeat. So I said that the World Cup is not easy to play. These opponents are very tenacious. Meng Fan sighed and said on the coaching bench. Well, teams of similar level in the league would lose most of their morale if they fell behind after 10 minutes of the game, but now, they can still maintain such a strong will to win. Zhu Shang couldn't help but marvel. This is the difference between the cup and the league. For that teams in the league, each team has its own position and goal. Many times, giving up a game that seems to have no chance and then winning in other games is the way for small teams to survive, and it is also a very wise approach. But the cup is different. You can't give up a game or lose a game. Even if they're weak teams, they know they can't go far, and they will try their best in every game they participate in. This game for River Plate is their last chance to qualify, and they will definitely fight to the end. Meng Fan replied. That's the truth, but I didn't expect it for a while. Zhu Shan replied with a smile. Then the two laughed at the same time. At this time, they can still laugh so easily. Of course there is a reason. River Plate on the field continued to launch a fierce attack, and Fifen was defending steadily. They continued to use the previous offensive method, constantly dispatching back and forth, trying to find that direction and route of the attack. Under such involvement, of course, a player will be left alone, but when they saw such an attack, Zhu Shan and Meng Fan were completely relieved. Such an attack would not have any problem with Fifen's defensor, but would instead cause a huge flaw in the riverbed. You know, there is Zheng Qi on the field. This is a guy who is best at finding loopholes. After dispatching back and forth, the riverbed finally found a good opportunity 2 minutes later. This time it was not Zhu Yi who was left alone, but another substitute, Tang Ziyuan. In fact, there were people who were left alone before, but it was Chainlin who was left alone. Seeing that it was him, the riverbed players gave up the attack. After all, they could see from the information that Chainlin was the defensive stalwart second only to Liu Shibo on the Fifen defense line. Such a player was certainly not something they could easily deal with. On the contrary, this Tang Ziyuan seemed to be born in a Class A team, was not young, and his performance was not very good. He was a good target for breakthrough. Tang Ziyuan was indeed one of the weakest people in Fifen. He and Zheng Qi were all former players of Kangkong. Players from a relegated team in the elite would not be very good. Compared with the 4 young players Zheng Qi, Bai Sinata, Yin Yu and Yeo Kaian, Hiam Thong, Jin and Zifei were not young anymore, and were about the same age as Fuladi, so they seemed to have no future. In fact, their performance in the game was at the same level as Zhu Yi. After all, they were professional players, and their performance at the same level as grassroots players was indeed very poor. But what was the reality? They didn't seem to have much performance, just because they were in a strange team like Fifen. With their attributes and level, it wouldn't be a big problem for them to play as the main force in an ordinary Super League team, at least they could play as the semi-main force. And if they went to a league team, they could even play that core position. So the next fierce attack of the River Plate was once again brutally hit. Facing the opponent's main attack, Tang Ziyuan, like Zhu Yi, also did not retreat a step, and at the same time, he did not die. He didn't have the ruthlessness of Zhu Yi, but he had more professional experience than Zhu Yi, and he could use his body to withstand injuries better. In this regard, Fifen's substitutes were far better than the average players, because they often just stood there to output, and faced the opponent's fierce attack more than once or twice. Many times, they had to rely on their bodies to withstand the opponent's damage. How to use the least physical value to withstand the greatest damages are science. And Fifen's substitutes, each of them is an excellent student in this study. Again, they seem to be inconspicuous on the court, and often seem to have no effect at all. It was not because they were really bad, but because they looked bad in a team like Fifen. Looking bad and being really bad are 2 different things. The attackers of River Plate were about to collapse. One was like this, and 2 were also like this. There were 3 people attacking at the same time, 3 quasi-god level players, and in a short period of time, they couldn't kill Fifen's substitute. Is there any justice in this? When they were lamenting like this, they found that their bodies could not move again. Damn, this again. Amida shouted in anger. The next moment, he and his 2 teammates were sent off the court. Fifen began to counterattack. Relying on the advantage of numbers, they began to beat up the opponent. Fifen's substitutes continued to stand and output, but their output, in a reckless manner, could cover a large area. Fifen's main players began to attack flexibly, constantly attacking the River Plate's defensor, attacking the football, and trying their best to grab the ball. Even if they couldn't grab it, they had to refresh the football. River Plate repeated the story that happened in the last attack and defensor. They were constantly suppressed by Fifen, and then Fifen refreshed the football, then suppressed River Plate, and then scored a goal. In less than 20 minutes, they were leading 3-0. River Plate looked at the score and wanted to cry but had no tears. It seems that we were wrong. Their defensor cannot be attacked in this way, Miguel said helplessly. Others could only smile bigly. They didn't mean to blame Miguel. Since the tactics were decided by everyone together, of course everyone had to take responsibility together. Since the opponent has no obvious weaknesses to exploit, we can only fight hard. Next, we will attack steadily. No matter what, we have to score a goal first. We can't be like Melbourne Lightspeed, who couldn't score a goal in the whole game, Miguel said. It has to be said that he is still very good at boosting morale. When we are already 3 goals behind, it is obviously not realistic to say that we want to win this game. Just proposing such a small goal is easier to inspire people's fighting spirit. Indeed, after hearing this, the morale of the River Plate players began to be boosted again. Yes, even if we can't win this game, we can't be as embarrassed as Melbourne Lightspeed. At least we have to score a goal. Besides, with our strength, is it really true that we can't score a goal? Then this extraordinary team can't be beaten. With such a sharp offensive and such excellent defense, what team can beat them? Such a strong team is obviously unscientific and can't appear on the field. With this idea, River Plate launched an attack again. Chapter 921. There is still hope. They've learned their lesson and started to attack normally. Meng Fan said, looking at the attacking River Plate players. That's normal. After all, they've failed twice, and they're still running into us for the third time. That's stupid. Zhu Shan replied. Unfortunately, I really hope they never turn back from their mistakes, and still think about finding some weaknesses in our defense to launch an attack, so that we can keep our record of not losing the ball for a longer time. Meng Fan smiled. Well, it's impossible. Our defense is average to begin with, and we can't keep not losing the ball for too long. Zhu Shan replied. Their chatting like this, of course, only means one thing, that is, the current game situation. Fifan still has a great advantage over Fifan. This is also that fact. In terms of the score, they are leading by 3 goals. Although the opponent is launching an attack, Fifan has already understood from the previous test that although this team has good overall strength, there is still a big gap compared to Fifan. Especially in terms of outstanding individuals. When there is a certain gap between the overall team and the extraordinary team, if you want to break through such suppression and have the hope of winning, you have to make a breakthrough at a certain point. This is why those teams with God-level players in the Chinese league, even if they will eventually lose to the extraordinary team, will often have a great impact on the extraordinary team. But River Plate does not have such players. Their overall team is very good, and they can often rely on the advantage of numbers to target the opponent's God-level players and then win. In the South American qualifiers, they defeated other strong teams all the way, especially when facing the qualifying teams from Uruguay and Brazil. These two teams have God-level players, but they were beaten up by them and died with their eyes wide open. But now, when facing the extraordinary team, the overall team cannot suppress the opponent, and the opponent has enough God-level players for them to target, and even the weaknesses that were previously thought to be exploitable cannot be broken. In this case, River Plate's offense, even if it can occasionally score a goal, is just luck. Under such circumstances, River Plate launched an orthodox attack, but it does not mean that it will definitely score a goal. If the orthodox suppression attack can definitely score a goal, then the confrontation in the football era will not be so attractive. Many times, scoring a goal depends on luck. This has been proven by countless teams. River Plate's next attack was obviously not good enough. In the process of suppressing the attack, they made some mistakes, and these mistakes were just caught by Zheng Qi. So Liu Shibo blocked the opponent's attack. River Plate finished the attack and planned to retreat and rest before launching the attack. Zheng Qi started his attack. The so-called old strength has gone, and the new strength has not yet been born. In martial arts, this is a very dangerous situation. As a team, it is also the same. River Plate just attacked fiercely for a while. Such a suppression attack often requires suppressing the opponent a little deeper. In this case, they can only pay more physical energy consumption to form suppression. After the suppression was successful, it was reasonable to retreat and rest temporarily, but they took it for granted, so Zheng Qi seized such an opportunity. Sun Yi's ultimate move, Eagle Eyes and Wolf Guarding, was comparable to Lu Xiaoshan's instant killing ability. The two River Plate players who were retreating did not have full physical values to begin with. After being hit continuously by him, they had no time to struggle and left the field at the same time. At the same time, Liu Shibo was teleported by Su Jing like a divine soldier descending from the sky, and then landed directly in the center of the River Plate formation. The River Plate formation was immediately in chaos. They wanted to confront Zheng Qi head-on at first, and then wanted to encircle Liu Shibo at this time. Just after they hesitated for a while, other extraordinary players had already rushed forward. 10 seconds later, the two River Plate players who returned to the field retreated quickly and speechlessly. Because their large army had collapsed, most of them were killed, and the football was also taken away. At this time they could only retreat to defend. But even if they retreated to defend, it didn't make much sense. Their previous retreats were suppressed by Fifan in a textbook way, and they had no chance to resist. In fact, from this point, we should be able to see Fifan's level. Pasquier on the bench said speechlessly. Yes, suppressive offense, orthodox offense, to put it bluntly, is nothing more than the best offensive method to score goals after so many years of statistics. However, the most correct method requires strength to achieve it. An amateur team can't score goals against a professional team with a suppressive offense. To put it bluntly, this is also a dragon-slaying skill. Only when the strength is stronger than the opponent or at least the same level can you continue to score goals through suppressive offense. To achieve this, there must be a lower limit in the overall level. If you can't reach this lower limit, everything you do will be in vain. Obviously, Fifen has reached this lower limit, but River Plate has not. When the score became 4-0, River Plate was almost crazy. No matter how they attack, they lose the ball one after another. Now it's only been a little over half of the first half, about 25 minutes, and they've lost 4 goals. You know, Melbourne Lightspeed only lost 4 goals in the whole first half. Their collapse started in the second half. If they continue to play like this, won't they lose even more miserably than Melbourne Lightspeed? That's too embarrassing. The other powerful teams watching this game were also stunned. They just regarded it as a joke to win more goals against Melbourne Lightspeed, but now, River Plate has been beaten by them for 4 goals in more than 20 minutes, which is amazing. River Plate is a team that has won the World Cup after all, and a frequent visitor to the World Cup semi-finals. As long as the grouping is better, there is basically no problem in entering the semi-finals. Such a team is actually already in the upper reaches of the entire World Cup. Even if this River Plate does not have any God-level players, their overall performance is not inferior to the past. Otherwise, they would not have been able to qualify in the Argentine League, which is full of strong teams, and the South American qualifiers, which are also full of strong teams. To say that South America and Argentina as a whole have declined a lot in the past 2 years is not true. Their loss to Zenit in the first round was a glorious defeat. If it weren't for the loss of 1 or 2 core players who could take on the responsibility at the critical moment, they might not have lost that game. This proves that River Plate is not a pseudo-strong team. Such a team that is not a pseudo-strong team was beaten 4-0 by Fifen in more than 20 minutes. It is really different from the bloodbath in Melbourne at Lightspeed, how much they looked down on Fifen's bloodbath in Melbourne at Lightspeed before, how solemn they are now. Is this team so strong? Sergi couldn't help but mutter. They are really good, but it should also be related to the incomplete tactics of River Plate and the fact that the characteristics of both teams are mutually restraining. Agatha thought for a while and said, otherwise, if they really have that level, no team in the entire World Cup can stop them from moving forward. At most, they will create a little trouble. In short, we have to fight them. Petronovich said. Agatha and Sergei looked at each other and felt that Petronovich's direct approach seemed to be the most reasonable approach. In short, we have to fight again, and the rest doesn't matter. It's a matter of styles conflicting with each other. Wilson said affirmatively. Fifen's excellence lies in their core players, but this aspect is the weakest link of River Plate, and the fight on the field is also such a link. It is normal for River Plate to lose the ball repeatedly, but they will lose fewer balls in the future. After all, River Plate is also adapting. But it is also remarkable that they can always control the rhythm of the game. Fifen's team will be the most difficult team to deal with. I hope Zenit can consume some of their things. We must get the first place in the group. Hodgson said. Wilson nodded. Only by letting Zenit consume the opponent, and then getting the first place in the group, entering the finals more easily, and then waiting for the opportunity to beat Fifen, can it be possible. Although the hope is not great, it is not without hope. River Plate's next attack finally scored a goal. In the fierce attack and suppression, they did not reveal many flaws, and Fifen's resistance was not so serious. After 5 minutes of fierce attack, they finally scored a goal. At the moment of the goal, the River Plate players were as excited as when they won the South American Championship and began to celebrate wildly. It was not until the excitement passed that they felt a little ashamed. What were they celebrating for? They were still 3 goals behind. What was there to celebrate? However, everyone understood them. Under such heavy pressure, they finally scored a goal, which was indeed worth celebrating and being excited about. Otherwise, it would be too embarrassing if they could not score a goal. Now at least they scored a goal, proving to others that the Fifen's defense was not indestructible. They would still lose the ball under attack. This is very important. At least it proves that they are not so impeccable, and they can also be defeated. Although they have not lost a single game in this year. The other players watching also breathed a sigh of relief. Facing a team that does not lose a goal and facing a team that still loses a goal, the pressure is different. Fifin's strength is terrible, but it is not impossible to fight against. Knowing this is enough, so that their confidence will not be lost before the game starts. Chapter 922. Get it back. It's a pity, we still lost the ball. Zhu Shan said. He really felt a little bit sorry, because he knew that the longer Fifin didn't lose the ball, the greater the invisible psychological pressure on other teams would be. This is also a game. It doesn't matter, as long as we still have a big score in the end, then even if they know that our strength is not that strong, it will also create huge pressure on them. People are like this, many things may not be let go even if they know. Meng Fan said with a smile. That's right, anyway, playing like this won't cost us too much, just normal attack, let Shen Renofei try his best to play his attack ability. Zhu Shan nodded. Fifin on the field also continued to launch the attack. In the following time, they only did one thing, that is, attack, and attack continuously. With Shen Renofei as the core, and Bin Shikai and Zheng Qi assisting him, Fifin's attack can be described as overwhelming. Riverplate tried every possible way to stop Shen Renofei's attack, but it was useless. They wanted to concentrate their forces to deal with Shen Renofei, but they would be separated by other Fifin players, giving Shen Renofei a one-on-one opportunity. Unable to break through the blockade of other Fifin players, they could only watch Shen Renofei exert his frontal attack ability and operation level to the fullest. Shen Renofei's operation level is extremely outstanding, only a little worse than Lu Xiaoshan, who represents the highest level of the Chinese League. The highest level of the Chinese League is actually the highest level in the world. In terms of Shen Renofei's operation, there are not many people in the world who can match his level. There is actually a way to deal with such a player. Either you have to beat him up with a large number of people. After all, two fists cannot beat four hands. Even as strong as Lu Xiaoshan can only retrieve temporarily when facing the siege of two players of the same level, or you can be close to him and temporarily entangle and resist, just like Liu Shibo is not unable to stop Shen Renofei's attack. But without these 2 points, Riverplate could not form a multiplayer gang, nor could it produce players with a level close to Shen Renofei to fight him, so it was a tragedy. When they were defending, they were constantly forcibly cut open by Shen Renofei. Everyone knew that once the defensive formation was forcibly cut open by the opponent, it would be very troublesome. At the time, the opponent would be able to forcibly cut the opponent's formation into 2 sides, focus on attacking the side without auxiliary protection, and then quickly form a numerical advantage. Speaking of which, the strategic goal that Riverplate wanted to form in the end by targeting the weaknesses of Fifin's defense line was this. They tried every means to fail to do it, but Fifin could do it almost easily every time they attacked. So the consequences were also very serious. Riverplate kept losing the ball. No matter whether they supported it for a long time or a short time, they kept losing the ball. Every time Fifin attacked, they would lose the ball. But it was not so easy for them to score a goal in their offense. They had to attack desperately and rely on luck. Compared with Fifin, the efficiency of the offense was simply 2 levels. So after the first half, not only the Riverplate players were a little broken, people like Agatha Wilson were also a little speechless. 8-2, this is the score after the first half. Although it is a little better than 4-0, it is only 2 more goals lost, but 8 goals were lost in the first half, which is too speechless. And although Fifin played very fiercely, it can be seen that they did not consume too much of the main force. The 4 core players and 7 or 8 main players took turns to play, and the substitutes also took turns to play. Their playing time was not much less than that of the main players. It can be said that the strength of each player was brought into play, and it did not cause too much burden to anyone. In other words, Fifin was playing a normal game and playing at his normal level. Then they beat the South American champions to pieces. With such a performance, even if they knew that Fifin should have restrained Riverplate in terms of tactics and personnel configuration, and they would not be so passive if they were replaced, they still felt palpitations. What kind of performance will Fifin have in the second half of the game made them more concerned. Riverplate had no hope at this time, but they still had fighting spirit. That was not to let Fifin score too many goals. So after the start of the second half, under Fifin's attack, Riverplate's players began to pay more attention to defense, and they were more focused on delaying when attacking. This performance was actually giving up that game, just to avoid losing more balls. In a way, they did it. They only lost 5 goals in the second half, but they did much worse in offense than in the first half, and didn't score a single goal. This is no wonder. When a team is attacking, they want to delay time and not lose the ball, then what effect can they have in attacking? In this case, of course, they can't create a real threat. The final score of this game was 13-2. After scoring 13 goals in the first game, Fifen scored 13 goals again in the second game. The only difference is that they lost 2 goals in this game. However, this is no longer important. Everyone can see that Fifen is a team that is good at attacking. This is the World Cup. Even if Melbourne Lightspeed is the underdog in the World Cup, even if River Plate is not the best team in the World Cup, it is still the World Cup. 90 minutes in a game, 13 goals, this is enough to prove Fifen's strength in attack. They scored so many goals with their tyrannical strength. In these 2 games, they fully demonstrated their weapons. Maybe some people think that it is a bit silly for them to show all their strength in the first 2 games, but when the strength shown is good enough, it is enough to create greater pressure on all opponents. Like a terrifying war machine, Fifen unscrupulously showed his sharp claws to everyone, making everyone alert and even fearful at a glance. Facing such an opponent, no one can relax. Even their next opponent, the core members of the Russian Zenit team, which represents the highest level of the World Cup, were also greatly shocked. For Zenit, the next game is not very important. After all, not long after Fifen defeated River Plate, they also easily defeated Melbourne Lightspeed, won 2 consecutive victories, and have joined hands with Fifen to qualify from the group. They could have saved their strength, played casually with Fifen in the last game, and then showed their best side in the knockout round. However, they couldn't do that. If they got to the second place, they would most likely meet the first place of another group, the North American champion, the Knicks, who also represented the highest level of the World Cup, in the first round of the knockout round. There was actually no skill to talk about in a competition with only 8 teams. 5 games in half a month, 1 game every 3 days, many times you can only rush out with one breath, thinking too much will cause problems. And everyone basically knows which team is strong and which team is average. Do you want a stronger team? Then try to get the first place in the group, avoid the first place in another group, and then the second place in the group you face will naturally be weaker. In this case, the so-called big strategies such as avoiding the real and attacking the fake are useless. Only strong strength and outstanding performance on the field are the key. Show your best state all the way, just win all the way, and then when everyone's energy is declining, show a state that is a little better than the opponent to kill the opponent. This is the best way to win the championship. Li Qing's led team had win the championship for the first time. In fact, not everyone can do it. In fact, in the history of the entire World Cup, Li Qing and his team have used the strategy of pretending to be a pig and eating a tiger to such an extreme. That was a very special exception, not a tactic that can be used repeatedly. Fifen certainly did not want to adopt such a tactic. What they wanted was to win all the way. Although the grouping situation was not very good, so that they would naturally be in a more tiring situation when facing the first place in another group, but since they wanted to win the World Cup Championship, since they wanted to win the unprecedented 5 crowns, facing such a difficult situation and unfair environment, that was natural. Otherwise, why do you think no team has been able to win the 5 crowns for so many years? If no one had real strength at the beginning, then after the World Cup in the football era has a history of several decades, all teams will want to win the 5 crowns themselves, and want to fight to the death to prevent other teams from winning the 5 crowns. When any team shows such signs, it will inevitably be targeted by all the opposing teams. No one wants to become a background board of history and a legend. So in this case, in the group stage, even if Fifen wanted to join hands with Zenit to advance and play a tacit friendly match, Zenit would fight Fifen to the death, even if doing so would affect their subsequent performance, thus giving their old rival, the American team, an advantage. But they still had to do it. We actually knew this a long time ago, so there's no need to worry. Zheng Qi laughed in the team. Our championship was not won by the charity of other teams, but by their crazy attacks and targeting. Then in the World Cup, we will also use our outstanding performance to snatch the World Cup Championship from them and tell everyone that we are the 5-time champions. That's right. Fifen's players waved their fists one after another, and their morale was high. Chapter 923 Zenit's Preparation. It has to be said that the goal of the 5-time champion is a great stimulus. It is precisely because of this stimulus that the extraordinary players will never slack off in the World Cup. They will use all their enthusiasm to face every opponent in the game. Even if they are facing Zenit in this game. Even before this game, they have actually qualified in advance. But they still want to win this game, use a victory to get the first place in the group, and then face the second place in another group, and better pave the way for entering the finals. It's not bad to win the 5-time champion. Zhu Shan muttered to Meng Fan. If we don't want to win the 5-time champion, we don't have to win this game. We can save our strength and lose this game, and at the same time we can get familiar with this opponent and face the Knicks as the second place in the group. As long as we have no problem with our energy, there is still a great possibility of defeating them. When it comes to the final, we are more familiar with Zenit and have a greater chance of winning. There is nothing wrong with this tactic, and it can even greatly increase our chances of winning, but don't forget how Zheng Qi lost last year. Meng Fan replied. Zhu Shan immediately shut up. That's true. Last year, Zheng Qi actually had this idea. Because they wanted to win the 5-time championship so badly, even a famous coach like Luo Qishuan was a little confused. They chose to save their strength in the last round, and directly eliminated the first place of another group in the first round of the knockout stage, and then gave the first place of their own group a good look in the best state. In theory, there is nothing wrong with doing this, and it can greatly increase the team's chances of winning. However, he overlooked that under normal circumstances, such tactics are acceptable, but what they faced at the time was not a normal situation. The opponent targeted them much more. At the same time, such a strategy does not conform to Zheng Qi's characteristics. Whether it is Lu Xiaoxin or Shen Ruofei, they don't care about anything. As long as they are reckless and tough, although it seems a bit brainless, it can fully display their level. After doing that, Zheng Qi lost its winning rhythm and was beaten badly by the Knicks in the knockout round. Although Shen Ruofei and Lu Xiaoxin quickly found their offensive rhythm, they still lost the crucial game in frustration due to various reasons and the fact that they were too far behind at the beginning. Although there were also reasons for the internal ghost, if they maintained their own rhythm and moved forward courageously, with the level of Lu Xiaoxin and Shen Ruofei, even if someone dragged them down, they would have a much greater chance of winning all the way. Of course, this is just a hypothesis. And their bloody lessons gave Fifan valuable experience. This approach of showing off their muscles all the way and crushing the past no matter what the situation is the grand strategy that Zhu Shan and Meng Fan came up with. Just crush the past all the way, although this seems to be a bit overdrawn, but with Fifan's level, even if they overdraw, it won't be too much, as long as Zheng Qi's body doesn't have any problems. This doesn't seem to be a big deal now. After Meng Fan's treatment and daily acupuncture to help him recover from fatigue, Zheng Qi's performance is very lively, although everyone knows that this is likely to be a way of overdrawing energy. However, Zheng Qi is willing to do this, and no one else can stop him. In fact, almost everyone in the team doesn't know what kind of pressures Zheng Qi's body is facing, and the few people who know that if Zheng Qi's physical deterioration is irreversible, then this will be the time for him to finally shine. The existing scientific and technological power can still keep him alive for a long time. Even if he survives in the football era, he can also live for a long time, but in that case, he can no longer be a professional player. Such an overdrawn energy is something he needs to avoid as much as possible. Zheng Qi also knows this very well. So he doesn't have any other distractions now, just thinking about devoting everything he has in the game. No one can resist such fighting spirit. The level shown by Fifan in the first 2 games is enough to prove that they're a team that is very good at attacking. Relatively speaking, their defense is a little worse. Although there are top players like Liu Xibo and a group of tenacious substitutes, it is not very difficult for us to score goals at our level. Agata said to all the players of Zenit. Although she, Petrovic and Sergei are the 3 giants of Zenit, the other players are still very outstanding. This is the confidence of a top giant. There is no one who drags down their team. Every player, whether it is the main force or the substitute, has strong strength. After all, in the competition system of the football era, whether it is the main force or the substitute, there will be enough opportunities to play. Therefore, it is not difficult for the top teams to put together a top lineup. Only the strong teams in China are always changing their personnel, which is also because the overall level of the Chinese league is indeed much better, while the strong teams in other countries are often more stable and stronger. This is especially true for Zenit. They are the overlords in Russia, and have maintained their dominance for many years. At the same time, they are also rampant in the Eastern European division, and they are always crushing the opponent all the way, just like China is crushing the opponent all the way in the East Asian division. Of course, they can maintain such a level because they always have the best players. For example, Sergei, one of the big 3, was poached by Zenit from other teams. After being poached, he quickly became one of the core players of Zenit. Their other main players are all players of quite good level, and the substitutes also have strong strength. Compared with Fifan, their high-end level may still be a little worse, but their overall strength is slightly better. However, this group of good players are quietly listening to Wagata's analysis at this moment. In this case, we can't think about how to make the opponent score less, that's not what we are good at. What we need to do is to do our best in offense, and then try to reduce the possibility of their scoring. Use our best points to attack their defense and score goals. Agatha set their tactics for this game. Zenit is of course also a team that is good at attacking. Their dominance in Russia and Eastern Europe is not achieved by defense. They rely on offense, crazy offense, continuous offense, and overwhelming offense. Their long-term dominance has built their offensive confidence. In this case, they will of course choose to fight for fun with offense. Agatha's mind is very clear. She did not want to use defense to deal with Fifon's offense, but chose to show her best side. In terms of breaking the formation, you can't lose to the opponent's Shinrufe. Agatha said to Petronovich. Don't worry, no formation can stop me. Petronovich made a muscle-flexing motion and said in a rough voice. Don't rush blindly. Sergei reminded. Their defensive core prefers to command defense and think more. The more direct I am, the more difficult it is for him to react. Petronovich answered naturally. Agatha nodded, and Sergei also nodded. Petrovich's words accurately grasped the core of the problem. Although he looked rough, he could actually grasp the essence of the problem directly. This is a kind of fighting intuition. Just like in the ancient battlefield, many generals who were considered to have only muscles but no brains were able to fight on the field and were invincible. It can only be said that they may not be very intelligent, but their intuition on the battlefield can allow them to directly find opportunities for victory. They may not be good at strategy, but they are all masters in specific tactics. Of course, tactics alone are not enough if strategy is not good. Even if you were as strong as Zheng Qi, you will inevitably be besieged at Gaixia. Zheng Qi, who was victorious in every battle, could only choose to retreat in the end. Hannibal, who was invincible, was eventually defeated and captured. When they won one local victory after another, their overall backwardness made their victory seem useless. Petrovich is such a general. He is extremely sharp in specific tactical thinking. Ivan's words are also a reminder to you, Boris. Agatha turned to Sergei and said. I'm also a defensive player of this type. Facing Shinrufe's attack, I will naturally suffer a loss, right? Sergei laughed. That's right. Agatha nodded. I noticed this. I won't let others deal with his attack. I will do it myself. If you want to use multiple people to deal with such a player, it will fall into Fifon's accustomed rhythm. I will deal with him and interfere with their attack very well. Sergei nodded. Very good, everyone knows their responsibilities, so we will get the best results on the court. In the first two games, we won easily, and for everyone, we don't have many opponents in China and Eastern Europe, so we are used to saving some strength in the game, but one thing everyone should know is that Fifon is not an opponent we can save strength when facing. In tomorrow's game, we must exert all our strength from the beginning and take the initiative from the beginning. Because we don't know whether Fifon showed their full level in the first two games. With such a high level, it is impossible to have any reservations, right? Sergei said after thinking for a while. There's nothing that those guys in China can't do, it's always better for us to make some preparations in advance. Agatha sighed. The other players of Zenit nodded and agreed with her. After all, in the past decade or so, Chinese clubs have been very successful. Chapter 924. China's team is more worthy. When Zenit was preparing, Fifon was also preparing. Fifon had studied their big three for a long time. After all, for Fifon, their biggest opponents were undoubtedly Zenit of Russia and the Knicks of the United States. The teams of these two countries were the most outstanding teams in the World Cup outside of China. Although one of them would become a second-tier team, everyone knew that the teams of these two countries were undoubtedly of the same tier. The reason why they became two teams of different tiers was that a team from China would deserve to occupy a place in the first tier. In this way, they would only have one team that could occupy the first-tier position. Zenit would fall to the second tier this year only because the Knicks was the defending champions and naturally ranked in the first tier. In fact, Zenit and the Knicks were teams of the same tier and were the teams that could threaten Fifon the most in the World Cup. Whether it was the generally recognized weaker Melbourne Lightspeed, Ivory Coast 7-Leaf Clover and UAE Al Ain, or the stronger South American champion River Plate and European champion Liverpool, none of them could pose any substantial threat to Fifon. Although they are not completely without a chance to defeat Fifon, because River Plate and Liverpool are at least at the level of the upper-middle teams in the Chinese league, but if Fifon takes it seriously, they really have no chance. The only teams that can really threaten Fifon are Zenit and Knicks. They are both strong teams, with excellent core players of God-level players, and a strong overall team. At the same time, they are also teams accustomed to winning. Long-term victories have given them a strong psychological quality. Only such teams can really pose a threat. In fact, in recent years, it is only these two teams that can cause trouble for Zheng Qi and Tin. In the past, South American and European teams could occasionally win a championship, but in the past 10 years, Eastern European and North American teams have become increasingly strong. If it weren't for the Chinese teams that were equally outstanding and suppressed them, they might have turned the World Cup into a two-person show. Therefore, FIFA's previous preparations were almost all aimed at these two teams. After all, everyone knows that if FIFA wants to win the World Cup, these two teams are absolutely the hurdles that cannot be bypassed. Even if they are not in the same group, they will always meet in the next knockout round. For this reason, FIFA didn't even study other opponents too much. After all, they didn't have enough time, but the victory over River Plate proved that as long as they take the game seriously, even River Plate would find it difficult to cause them trouble. Zenit is of course different. They are a team that has the ability to cause trouble for FIFA. Petrovic is good at attacking, Sergi is good at defending, and their core is the young Agata, who can also be called the world's #1 female player. Her performance last year was quite good. She is an all-around player who can do everything on the court. Although she is mainly an auxiliary, she also has a certain offensive ability. This feature is very rare among players all over the world. Zhu Shan said to FIFA's players, "I still think that the auxiliary player also takes care of command and defense, which is a bit unprofessional. If she meets Li Qing's will teach her a lesson." Shen Ruofei said. "Maybe, but when facing other auxiliary cores, her versatility can better help teammates. So far, she has not met Li Qing's, and we don't know if she is better than Li Qing's." Zhu Shan smiled. The extraordinary players nodded one after another. They certainly knew how outstanding Li Qing's was. With Li Qing's outstanding level, he only focused on being a commander and auxiliary core, which made them naturally feel that this girl's choice should not be the right way. Of course, Li Qing's has not appeared in the World Cup in the past 3 years, and Agata has just emerged in the past 3 years. Without a match on the field, no one can say who is right. In short, we must be careful. She has become the well-deserved core of Zenit at such a young age. Even older players like Petrovic and Sergei are obedient. We should know that she is an extremely outstanding player. She may even have surpassed the upper limit of God-level players and reached the level of Lu Xiaoshan and Li Qing's. Zhu Shan continued. Coach, I know you want us to take the game seriously, but isn't this too exaggerated? Can this girl be so powerful?" This time it was Liu Xiao's turn to say something. "Think of the upper limit of the opponent is higher, then it will be easier for us to deal with it," Zheng Qi said with a smile. Zhu Shan looked at Zheng Qi and also laughed. "Yes, that's the truth," Zhu Shan said. "Think of the upper limit of the opponent is higher, that is to say, no matter what level Agatha is, just treat her as an opponent of the same level as Li Qing's or Lu Xiaoshan, isn't it? Anyway, FIFA is used to competing with Zheng Qi, and didn't they win this year? In addition to the big three, Zenit's overall performance is also very good, each of their players has a very good level. In this regard, only half of our players can compete with them. In other places, they are actually at a disadvantage. So in the game, you must obey that command, surround a core on the field, and devote all your strength. Do you understand?" After hearing Zhu Shan's words, FIFA's players nodded one after another. They didn't feel that this was an insult to them. In fact, they knew that in the FIFA team, they mainly relied on the core players. What they had to do was very simple. When they needed to output, they would output as much as possible. When the core players were in danger, they had to go up to protect them. Even if they died, they couldn't let the core players die on the field, they were just laborers and piano bearers. But without laborers and piano bearers, artists couldn't play beautiful music so easily. They had a clear positioning of themselves. The ambitious ones had actually left, such as Yuan Kong and Zheng. They left FIFA because they were called by the former boss and because they knew that they might not win the championship if they left FIFA, but their performance was more important. Those who stayed, such as Lin Fei and Zheng Qi, were actually players without much ambition. Although their status in FIFA was not as good as the 4 core players, they were also the most important players outside the 4 core players. They were still very satisfied with their status to compete for the championship. The other substitutes are very clear about their own positioning. They are basically from the first-class youth training, and their own talents are not particularly good. Even if they're lucky, what they can expect most is to go to the Super League one day and see the top style of their own league. That is almost their lifelong pursuit. And now, FIFA gave them the opportunity. Not only have they won so many championships, but they also have the opportunity to impact so many top players and geniuses. What an honor for them. Not to mention that they can still contribute their own strength in the game. Even if they can't contribute their own strength at all in the game, they won't mind at all. Of course, Zhu Shan will not let them not contribute their own strength in the game. In the final analysis, the football era is a fight for the whole. Substitutes are also very important, and the performance of substitutes can also play an extremely critical role in the game. FIFA seems to be based on the 4 core players on the surface, but in fact, the performance of each of their players is very important. Zheng Qi is indeed the most critical player, but he can't carry a team alone. The 4 cores can't take on everything. At most, they can only take on some important things. Victory depends on the whole. The last round of the group stage seemed to be a formality. After all, in Group A, FIFA and Zenit won 2 consecutive games and advanced to the next round. In Group B, Knicks and Liverpool also won 2 consecutive games and advanced to the next round. However, such a game is also very important. In the last round, whether it is FIFA or Zenit, Knicks or Liverpool, they will try their best to defeat their opponents, and then put themselves in the first place in the group, and then meet relatively weaker opponents in the knockout stage. Only in this way can they better attack the championship. The last round of the game is carried out at the same time. During the game, whether it is the players or the coaches, the contact with the outside world is completely closed, so they don't know the live scores of other games, and can only try their best to win. Of course, for the 4 teams that have been confirmed to win to the semi-finals, they will certainly try their best to win under such circumstances. This is also a preview of the knockout stage. No one will retain their strength under such circumstances, because retaining strength often means losing their edge. Especially after last year. Everyone remembered Cheng Feng's lesson. Countless people were watching these games. Of course, more people were watching the games between FIFA and Zenit, and between Knicks and Liverpool. After all, the other 2 games really had no meaning, especially the game between FIFA and Zenit, which was considered by many to be a preview of the final. The 2 sides undoubtedly represented the highest level of the World Cup. Such a confrontation between the highest levels must mean that the winning side has more chances to win the World Cup. What's more, FIFA still has a chance to challenge the 5-time champion. If they can beat Zenit, then they can almost be confident that they can beat Knicks. The glory of the 5-time champion is right in front of them. Whenever they think of this, FIFA's fans can't help but feel extremely happy. Even other Chinese fans are very happy. After all, FIFA is a team from China. To break an unprecedented record, of course the Chinese team is more qualified. Chapter 925 Genius. Chinese fans certainly have such confidence. In the more than 80 years since the establishment of the World Cup, Chinese teams have won nearly half of the championships, especially in the past 6 years, they have won 5 championships. From the perspective of a league level, this has reached the peak, and it can even be said that it has left other leagues behind for a considerable distance. Although many times there will be a peak and then a decline, such as when Mengfifan was invincible, the Chinese league was also in a heyday. Soon with the fading of Mengfifan, the Chinese league also fell into a trough for a long time. It was only 5 or 6 years later that it hit the World Cup championship again. But before the trough came, the strength of the Chinese league was still extremely strong. Especially different from the last heyday, the heyday of the Chinese league was the only one in the south. And this time, the heyday is Chengfen, Tianhe, and Fifan. These 3 strong teams will come to the World Cup one by one to show their muscles, making the World Cup strong teams lose face. If it weren't for the blockade of Chengfen last year, then they would really lose more face. This year, Fifan is going to challenge for the 5-time champion again, which makes those strong teams even more depressed. You guys either don't come, or come again and again. It was tiring to stop Chengfen once last year, and you come again this year. Too much, right? Zenit, of course, has such depressed thoughts. However, no matter how depressed they are, they can only bite the bullet. You know, even a domestic giant like Zenit rarely has the opportunity to win the 5-time champion. For example, they continue to win the league this year. This is their 7th consecutive league championship, but in the domestic cup, they lost to their opponents. It's not that there are no teams in Russia that can stop them. In the league, maybe because the overall situation is worse, they can't stop Zenit from moving forward, but in the cup, there are 3 or 4 teams that can often defeat them. If they are not careful, they will lose the cup. and the Eastern European qualifiers are not so easy to play, they have to invest a lot of energy. Zenit had many opportunities to challenge for the 5-time champion in previous years, but in those years, they lost to Zheng Qi twice and Tianhe twice, and they almost lost confidence. This time facing Fifan, they did not lack confidence, but they thought that they must fight Fifan well. If they can beat Fifan, they will have the opportunity to win the World Cup championship that they have lost for nearly 10 years. For the Russian overlord Zenit, they are also very depressed after so many years away from the World Cup championship. The last time they won the World Cup championship was exactly 10 years ago. In the 9 years since then, Chinese teams have won 5 times, including Zheng Qi 3 times and Tianhe twice. The Knicks and Lakers from the United States have won once each, and the European and South American champions have also won once. So this situation makes Zenit even more embarrassed. Their domestic opponents have upgraded from mocking them for being experts in domestic wars and amateurs in foreign wars to accusing them of monopoly, which has hindered the development of Russia's overall level, so they are actually under a lot of pressure. Facing Fifan, they need to perform better and try to defeat them, so as to build confidence in winning the World Cup. Even if they lose, they have to show strength and performance that no other team in that country can show, to prove to everyone that Zenit is Russia's conscience. They are not the culprit that hinders Russia's overall level, but other teams are too useless. Internal strife exists in every country, not to mention that there is only one team in a country that is qualified to participate in the Intercontinental Knockout Tournament and the World Cup each year. If you have good results, of course you will be criticized. If you are not criticized, it means you are not popular, that's the reason. In such expectations, the players of both sides came on stage. There are also quite a lot of fans on both sides in the stands. Chinese fans certainly have an absolute advantage, but Russia is also a well-deserved big country. There are also many fanatical fans in their country. At this time, they will also be united against the outside world. Although the number of fans supporting Fifan is nearly 3 times that of the fans supporting Zenit, under such a terrifying level, such a gap is nothing. After all, even if there are 100 million Chinese fans at the scene, there are tens of millions of Russian fans, which is not much different from them. When the two sides were cheering, although they were not evenly matched, the Russian fans would not be completely suppressed by the other side. It was in such an atmosphere that the players from both sides came out. When they came out, they were all looking at each other. Of course, the top players have a better feeling for the top players. Whether it was the 3 giants of Zenit or the 4 core players at Fifan, they were all observing each other, wanting to get to know each other better from the outside observation. Petronovich was looking at Shinrofei, Sergei was looking at Lieshbo, and Agata was observing Zheng Qi. Of course, they would not ignore the seemingly harmless Benshikayang. Fifan's core players did not focus on anyone, but they all looked at each other and saw the other team's members from beginning to end. Although they could not see anything, they would not give up this seemingly meaningless approach. After all, they could lose anything, but they could not lose their momentum. Of course, we cannot only focus on these key players. After all, the main players of both sides are very good. Fifan's substitutes seem to be a little worse, but in the last game, Zhu and others have already shown their level. They are not here to mess around, they also have their own role and performance. We can gauge the opponent's strength in the first confrontation. Zhu Shan sat down in the coaching booth and said to Meng Fan. Meng Fan nodded. Of course, both sides sent out all their main forces at the beginning, which was just right to see how outstanding the opponent's high-end strength was. After understanding, the tactical arrangement will be more targeted. 3 lines, 3 cores, it looks a bit rigid, but it shouldn't be that simple. Zhu Shan said. Yes, watching their videos, the little girl Agatha is really an alternative auxiliary. She can rush to the front line and constantly support the opponent. It's not easy to do this, although I think Li Qing's can do it. Meng Fan smiled. Well, the key is that she is still young. Maybe she can really carry forward this tactic and create a new school. Zhu Shan nodded in agreement. This is not an ordinary thing. If a new school is really created, whether Agatha has achieved outstanding owners or not, she can be called a grandmaster of a generation. After all, from the beginning of football to now, there are only a few tactical schools that have been proven to be effective. Although with the improvement of the players' level, tactical schools are constantly innovating, but in terms of the core, there is actually no change. Orthodox frontal advancement, compressing the opponent's activity space, relying on strong personal frontal breakthroughs, tearing open the opponent's defense line and gradually reducing the opponent's manpower. To put it bluntly, all tactics can be summarized into these 2 categories. However, if Agata's tactics can have a truly effective effect, then there is no doubt that it is the third school. The cornet, by example, senses the opponent's flaws as quickly as possible, and then launches an attack according to the situation. This school has actually existed for a long time. To be honest, Zheng Qi can also be regarded as this school, but this style of play requires too much from the core. Zheng Qi only occasionally uses this offensive tactic. After all, it consumes too much. Meng Fan replied with a smile. Zhu Shan thought about it and found that it was true. In addition to the overall and individual positions, this so-called third school is nothing more than letting the core position move forward. In the front position, it not only plays a tactical role, but also a strategic role. Meng Fan had such a prototype before, and Li Qing's also occasionally used this tactic. Lu Xiaoshan was too lazy to think of such tactics. He was more direct, so he was not considered this school. Zheng Qi often attacked forward, which was also a similar school. This is the so-called third school outside the overall flow and the individual flow. It can also be called the genius flow. If so, don't we have to face a genius? Zhu Shan thought about it and said. Then you are not afraid, don't we have a genius too? And there is more than one. Meng Fan laughed dumbly. The players on the bench also laughed. They were very relaxed at this time. After all, with the extraordinary level, even if they faced Zenit, the possibility of victory was very high. They were relaxed, but the players on the field could not act so relaxed. No matter what game it is, once you were on the field, you have to go all out. They attacked first. Zheng Qi said. Well, this kind of terrain, let's see the effect of their attack. Shinrao Fei replied. The map of this game has also appeared in front of them. Pengqing. The terrain is not complicated. It can be said that it is the same as Chibai, which is very simple and has a wide field of vision. This kind of map is suitable for hard fighting. It is not until the second half that the Shu army's cavalry will rush out to make trouble, which will greatly affect the offensive and defense of both sides. Such a map is also suitable for direct confrontation and testing, because in such a confrontation, both sides can play their overall level very well. In such a map confrontation, unless the strength is much higher than the opponent, then you must do your best to better fight against the opponent. Otherwise, if you want to save your strength, but the opponent takes the lead, it will be a bit disadvantageous. This point is more advantageous to the party that attacks first. It's just right. Let's see what level Zenit's attack is that swept across Eastern Europe. I think they should be better at attacking. Shinrao Fei said confidently. His fighting spirit immediately ignited the passion of all the extraordinary players. Finde est capture much as great as Pelaga has to el final. No se olviden de dull like busgasms contenido exclusivo ixo immediato. Se escravata news teropatrian. Recurada, carda like, se scripsino donaking nos anima continued. Great as a todos nos vemos on el próximo video.